Good evening. This workshop of the board of the Socorro Board of Trustees will come to order, please. The date is Tuesday, March 31st, 2026, and the time is 5:32, and we have a confirmed quorum. Thank you for joining us for this meeting, both in person and online, via our YouTube stream. The full recording of the meeting will be available on YouTube and archived through the board website, where viewers have the option of watching the meeting with closed captions translated in multiple languages. Gracias por acompañarnos en esta reunión, tanto en persona como en línea a través de nuestra transmisión de YouTube. La grabación completa de la reunión estará disponible en YouTube y se archivará a través del sitio web de la Junta, donde los espectadores tienen la opción de ver la reunión con subtítulos traducidos a varios idiomas. Continuing then, please, let's all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Continuing then our agenda, we have public comment. We did not have any speakers sign up for public comment, so then we will continue with the board workshop, of course. Everybody's familiar with our Lone Star governance coach, Mr. Ben Mackey. Sir.
Hello. Good evening, y'all.
Good evening.
It's great to be here. We got a packed agenda, but I think we'll move through pretty quickly because, I got to give y'all kudos. Everyone did their homework. I got a lot of individual feedback from everyone, and so that will help us move efficiently through tonight's meeting. We got a meaty agenda, but all really good, meaningful stuff. So with that, we will start first with the board self-evaluation. Again, this is something just to reorient everyone to it, is Lone Star Governance comes up with a framework that each of you had. It's called the Integrity Instrument. It's available online, publicly. It notes different practices that boards measure themselves on towards student outcomes focused governance. And so, for instance, it's things like goals and constraints, the priorities of the district. Does the district have them? Is it focusing on them, et cetera? And it goes through a number of these elements. This is something this board committed to doing. And I think back the first time we did this, it was Q3, so back in October or so. This board went through, there's 100 points available, and scored itself, and went through that process. Does anyone remember the score?
Not off the top of my head, but
7.
I know.
One.
One.
One out of 100. But this board has done a lot of work over that time. And it is quite impressive to see the work that you all have done. And so here we are for our next quarterly evaluation for this first quarter. So what you see up here, and I'll just kind of voice over it, is what individual scores were sent back. Each of you, with the exception of 1 to 2, provided your individual scores about where you thought the board was on each of these rubric strands. So you'll notice on some of these, we have some pretty tight alignment. Most people are agreeing on the same number, maybe 1 or 2 differences. And then in others, we had every score possible. So what we're gonna do is you all have already done a lot of work. You're gonna take your individual scores and actually, we're gonna work in groups to identify these through 3 chunks. So what I'm gonna ask you to do, you should all, in your folders, you have this instrument. Maybe some of y'all brought the notes that you sent me or looked through it. We're gonna do this in 3 chunks. So on the first 4, I'll quickly overview it. The first 4 are all about vision and goals. Vision and goals 1 is about, has this board adopted student outcome goals? And then item 2, vision and goals 2, is about, for each of those goals that you've adopted, do you have progress measures that are telling you if you're on track or off track? Then it switches to the non-student outcome goals, the other priorities that are important, the constraints. Does this board have constraints, and does it have progress measures on those constraints? And so that is what you see here on the first 4. On the goals, it looks like we know we've made progress from what was previously a 0. We're in between either a 4 points or a 12 points out of 15 total. So definitely some growth. The board's gonna have to decide which one of those 2 it is. Same thing with vision and goals 2. Very interestingly, we have 2 at 1 points, but then 2 at 12, or 4 at 12 points there. So we'll have to decide where we land there. And then for the constraints, Again, we have a range from 1 to 9 or 1 to 4 points. So what I'm going to ask you to do, and then we'll have a conversation, is I'm going to ask you to work with your shoulder partners. We're going to have Paul and Manny come together, Michael, Jimmy, and Maribel come together as a group of 3, and then Alice and Charles come together. And looking and remembering what you wrote, you're going to actually work through each of those 4. So the first 4, and you guys are going to agree on how many points do we actually get based on this? Is it 12? Is it 4? And why? And just a quick remember here, the score, you start at the first one, and you see if any of those are true. If they are true, you're done, and then that's your score. And then you keep going and checking off all the boxes you have. As soon as you miss a box, one of these is not there, you don't get most of the points. Even if everything in the 4.1 is checked, if one of them is missing, you don't get the 4 points. You go back to the first one. So that's what you're going to do is you're going to work through this, but I know you all have made some serious progress. I'm excited to see where you land. It looks like most of this board was either at a 4 or at a 12 on this first one. So any questions before we get started working through this? Okay, so your goal is to get with your partners, identify what score you are at together, and then where you would want to be next quarter. I'll give you some time, and I'll walk around and help if there is that.
She's running.
She ran out.
Good need.
I'm good. I'm good.
Where you want to be.
Anya, come on. Alright. That was between
Why are you
4 and a
bending?
12.
When you have a bad knee.
I think I put in a 12.
12
What are you doing? What are you doing?
I didn't want to leave you alone. I feel bad.
Yeah, do it.
It's because mine is on. Do you remember yours?
Now that you know, so.
Yes.
So, brother, how are you?
Have everything.
Yeah, I felt that we had everything.
Smart. Don't let anybody.
Require adult behavior. Are influenced by the superintendent.
Let's.
Are the superintendent's first
Yeah.
priority for resource allocation? Yes. The board relied on root cause analysis, comprehensive student needs assessment,
See, I remembered the first 3.
inform the identification and prioritization of all student outcomes. Okay, and I would say we did the root cause analysis. We had
0. Yeah. I'm smart. I don't know. I couldn't make a pretty X.
And on the
Okay, I have.
I felt, now looking at them a little bit more, that we could work on to get to the 15. I thought this was the one with that we didn't have yet. I felt comfortable with the first and second, but the third, as far as that goals through involvement and communication with students, staff, and community members, kind of that consistent piece, I think that's where we can work on.
Yeah.
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. All right, so we got 12. Good job, Michael. Oh,
Just one, right? Just the first one, or do we keep going?
you here?
Oh, the first 4.
Yeah, I did the same, and it was kind of the same
Yep,
piece
same
that.
reasons.
Agree?
Yeah. And it was this one right here. Exactly like the self.
He's afraid to like make me yell at him, so.
Or?
Yeah. So,
The next one.
CP.
okay, the next one is.
One.
Yeah, that's what I went with. Good job. Don't hit Michael.
No. Okay. The board adopted constraints. Yes, so you say one.
Oh, man.
Adopted 1 to 5 student only constraint learning process while working collaboratively.
Because when we his constraints, remember there was like we are gonna do all of the stuff, but not at the expense.
Again, community members. I think we're missing that.
So
In my
that's
opinion.
operational, not losing community trust or improving
Oh, yeah. Super glue? Mech whizzing and then.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yes, sir.
That one's not working too well, so they gave me another one today. I haven't gone into the physical therapist yet.
Oh, what was the first four, right?
I was hoping that it would stop.
Yes.
will challenge your organization
But they gave me another one for migraines,
to
but I'm not
challenge
impatient.
values. Yes, because
Right now, I'm really photosensitive. No, no, that would be weird. Right now, they're thinking that I'm winking.
It's Denemy.
we're not done yet.
Yeah.
No, we're on vision and goal 4. Oh, is that where we're at? Okay, sorry.
We'll go back. We'll repeat this process with the next two groups after this. But let's talk about these. I've got up here.
Stay?
I'm gonna keep it. This is the form that you adopt each time. It's where we kind of track this over time. It'll should show this growth over time based on where you all have spent a lot of time working over the last 3 months. So for the first one, vision and goals 1, I'm just gonna go around and tell me after your discussion. I assume everyone in their groups agreed on what they're gonna give, right? All right, we'll start here. What'd you all score for the first one? 12. 12.
What do you say?
I don't know. They had
12. All right, so everyone
No,
agrees here.
wait, no, pause. I'm sorry. I was looking at the wrong page. Yes, we did it 4.
Okay. So we got 2 groups of 12 and 1 group of 4. Talk to us about why you all scored a 4, and then we'll have one of the groups that scored a 12 share, and then we'll decide where we want to land.
Because, what do you think that the board relied on a root cause analysis covers the student needs assessment? What do you think that was part of it? Or we haven't done that part.
Okay. For the groups that, so we didn't rely on a root cause analysis or comprehensive needs assessment for either of the groups that said 12. What did you say for that one?
We said we did. We started with the root cause analysis. It was substantiated by the results on our annual performance assessment in the categories that we selected. In addition to that, when we surveyed our community during the spring community meetings, our community also reinforced the areas that they wanted us to focus on. So it seemed that, you know, all three of those aligned, and that's why we selected them. But I will say that I was unsure whether we had done the root cause analysis or not. It wasn't until Mr. Vasquez reminded me that, oh, yeah, we did. So,
All right, any other thoughts?
I see the same, that, I mean, we use data to decide, and then, of course, also, some of them, we had to select reading, right? Weren't we? But, I mean, we did use data to select these groups.
Yeah, and it says, the way I was reading it, it relied on a root cause analysis, so it wasn't anything necessarily, I mean, I think it was part of the work that our instructional team did and provided you with that information.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we discussed when I was going over this with Paul is I can most certainly see the perspective of a root cause analysis through the data that was collected during those spring community meetings that took place, and that was, if I'm not mistaken, that took place last spring. But for me, when I read a comprehensive student needs assessment, I'm not sure if we have seen that. And that's just kind of the perspective that I was offering, unless you all believe otherwise. I know that some students were part of those spring community meetings, and I'm not sure if that satisfies that requirement when asking a comprehensive student needs assessment, or if that even involves feedback directly from the folks that we serve. That's a way that I was interpreting it, but I don't know if you all view it differently.
I think this is an academic goal, so I think the data that we utilized was more of, yes, the academic information that would be the comprehensive student needs assessment. So we took the data based on the results of the kids and how they did, and where we want them to be in the future. And so the admin table, they did it for us. So really, they had to use data for us to be able to know what was important for our district, what we needed to do, and what would be good goals for our kids.
Right. And I guess just my question, Ben, here is when it outlines a student needs assessment, is that satisfactory? And, you know, in terms of, okay, we've gathered academic data or based on student performance, and we'll base it off of that, because the way that I view it is also gathering input from students themselves on this. But I mean, I could be interpreting this the wrong way.
Yeah, so there is not a checklist that is, yes, this counts, no, that doesn't count. The whole purpose of this conversation is for this board to come to an agreement. Did we do that or not? And is it something we need to do? When I remember our process, there were two parts of this that this board chose to do. Number one, you did community listening. That included student voice.
It did.
Students were participating and gave their voice to it. So that was one element of it. And then also, when we first went through this process, superintendent and his team shared, here are all the data that we ran through as a organization and why we recommend certain goal areas or constraint areas because of the data, whether it's taper report or academic data, et cetera. Generally, as far as this speaks to, that is a needs assessment. You're looking at both the quantitative data as well as the qualitative data. So if you're asking Ben Mackey, trustee, and I were doing this, I would count that. But again, if the board as a collective agreed and said, no, we need to do a little bit more, well, then that's just a learning that the board needs to do. So I think it's really, truly, there's not a right or wrong answer. The purpose of this is to reflect and be like, do we feel like we did this? And the answer, the coaching I would give to consider this is like, did you set your goals based on the reality of the data in your district and what your parents and your students and people are saying? And if you got those two things, then you probably did this. If you had no idea what the data was, you just picked goals because you liked them, then you might not have it. So I'll ask my group over here with the 4, did they change your mind to up it to a 12? Or
I think so.
Manny, just curious, are you interested in?
microphone?
Oh, thank you, sorry. Are you interested in moving forward with like a climate survey? I know we've talked about that. And I know that we did get feedback It wasn't just those that were present. I know that there was a QR code that community could give us feedback and students. But moving forward, as we're looking at this, is that a variable that you would want, not just the quantitative, but a climate survey that comes through from administration on a yearly basis?
A climate survey targeted to whom?
They could be a little bit of all. It could be faculty, staff, students, and parents. I know that, I mean, depending on what we feel we want to analyze.
You know, I think just the way that I'm viewing it also is continuous feedback is always welcome, and I think it should be part of the process. I know that those spring community sessions took place last year, but before those engagements took place, I'm not sure if there was anything like that that had been reoccurring in the past. So, and then I know that, you know, spring has already started, and I don't see any or plans for that further engagement for this school year, and so I think that's just kind of the way. If it was like a one-time thing and it was done for the last school year coming into this school year, okay, great. Last time we were dealing with this different situation. Now we've come out of the deficit. We have a new superintendent, and all, you know. Before, at this point last year, that wasn't the case. Now the situation is different.
What I hear you talking about is like, what's the process for going forward on this? So the purpose of this first one is about, did we look at data when we set our goals? It sounds like I hear the board agreeing, yes, we did. I think what you're referring to about what's the process in the system going forward will show up in one of these other areas that we'll talk about.
Okay.
And I'm glad you shared that because we had that conversation. And the reason we didn't do the 15 was because of the last item. And I think once we accomplish that piece of it, I think that'll get us to the 15th, or the 15, which is that qualitative piece.
Yeah,
that
that's what we were
looking at.
thinking too.
Are you there too?
Yes.
Can you speak specifically to which item on the last item you're talking about?
The one that says agrees, there is broad communication ownership of the board's vision and student outcome goals through involvement and communication with students, staff, community, and members.
Yeah. This is a really good point. Thank you for raising this, because we can listen to the community, we can take the data, we can set goals. But does the community own those goals as their own instead of ours? Maybe the few that showed up, but we know that's not everybody. So how do we then get to this broad community ownership? It is through this regular engagement that you all might choose to do based on this. So that's a great point there. Okay. All right. So it seems like we agree on a 12. We may put this up to a 15. We'll come back to that in a little bit. As far as the second one, Vision and Goals 2, about progress measures. This time we'll start with Manny and Paul. What score did you give? And we'll come back around.
12.
12.
12.
12.
12.
All right, seems like everybody is on the point of 12 here. Seems like everyone agrees. That's pretty impressive. Is there any particular reason why we did not move to 15?
Same
Same
thing.
thing,
the
community ownership.
members.
You know, sure. All right, looks like we got a trend emerging already. We got agreed. We don't need to spend more time on that. Let's go to Vision and Goals 3, the constraints. So again, just to reorient everyone, our goals are our student academic goals, and then our constraints are those other things that we have are super important. This board has chosen fiscal responsibility, healthcare plan sustainability, and perception from students, parents, and community members and stakeholders. So with that, let's see where we landed here. We'll start with our center table and then come to the right and then to the left.
3.
3.
3 as well.
3.
Ooh, we put 9.
9. All right, we got 3s and 9s. So let's hear from the 9. Why'd you put 9 and not 3? And then we'll hear from the 3s about what we thought was missing.
Okay, so 3, each superintendent constraint describes a single operation, action, or
Actually, let me pause. I'm going to redo this. I'm going to ask the ones who have scored 3. Why did you not put it as a 9? And then we'll come back to the conversation. We'll
what
start
are we
here.
not doing?
With us, right?
Yep.
I don't remember doing board self-constraints.
Okay. I
I
don't
think
remember.
we did superintendent constraints, but not self-constraints. And so maybe the naming convention there is throwing me off, or maybe we really didn't do it. But either way, at this time, I just couldn't recall them. So and I don't think any of us could, so we agreed.
Is it the same reason over here? All right. And then do we remember board self-constraints?
I don't think I do.
Yeah, I don't know if we've got to that yet either. So that's the one thing. And again, what board self-constraints are is, all right, we place constraints on the superintendent. Superintendent, make sure not to allow us to be financially irresponsible or have an unsustainable healthcare plan. Board self-constraints is an activity where the board will put constraints on itself. We as a board agree, for instance, we're not going to give operational advice to staff, or we are not going to violate our board operating procedures. So sounds like doing board self-constraints that this board wants to set is a possible next step as we go forward.
Yes, sir.
But with that,
Got
I
it.
hear 3.
Yes,
All right.
understood.
3 it is. Up from 0. Great work. And then the last one, let's start back here and go around again.
4.
4.
4.
4?
4.
All right. Seems like we all agree on that. We have progress measures, and this board has put some really thoughtful progress measures in place. And I must give you all kudos to this from all the progress. You all have really thought deeply about each of the progress measures, have begun monitoring those work, and so way to go. And then as I reflect on each of these 4 things, I'm going to ask you to talk with your partner. If I had to make 1 or 2 steps based on reflecting on where we're at currently here, what would be the next 1 or 2 steps that I would want my board to engage within as it relates to vision and goals? Go ahead and talk to your partner, and then we'll come back together.
And I think that's most certainly through mass communications. Because the best way, when folks ask, how do we engage the community?
I can do that.
The answer is
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, because I saw you looking at the projectors, I'm like,
Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
and
How are you, sir? Glad to have you. Glad to have you.
how are you?
Reach out to as much as we can,
How are you, sir?
and then maybe have quarterly meetings.
Did he say good morning?
But we're not going
Maybe the fall and the spring, so the community knows where we're at, so they know the goals, especially for the fall. I'm sure it goes in
Annual
June.
reports,
Annual reports, yeah, we do that. We do annual.
but that they're broadly shared, and not only with parents, but with the greater community also.
survey.
Exactly.
And you have a community meeting. So how can we engage in the community?
But I think, like regular newsletters, figuring out who our target audience is.
So,
How do you
community
know that,
Just
just, your teacher is supporting you academically? How do you, so,
Voters.
I mean, depending on the community candidate, it's ideal for how there's enough resources for you for,
To
I mean, I've seen so many different questions.
how do we explain that to them if they don't show up?
it's a way to be proactive.
I think 8th grade. Let me tell you, they'll tell you if they
I would see it in the sense of yes, as the parents, at the end of the day, it's a
and they're usually
school district so that we can
and they'll tell you,
All right.
pass bonds,
I- in my
payers, all the things that are needed to continue for us to provide services.
Something. For free ticket to
So that when it is time,
X, Y, and Z.
it's like, hey,
But then that's when
All right, based on this conversation, I'm thinking about vision and goals and all the different elements here. If you and your partner had to agree on one thing that we might want to do as a board going forward based on this, what would it be? One thing. We'll start with this group.
more community engagement.
More community engagement, all right? This group?
Sir, you said 1 or 2?
I'm asking you to present one right now, and then we'll come back.
Oh, okay.
Present a different one. They said board community engagement. Do you have a
Well-
different one?
That one aside, the board constraints.
Board constraints, all right.
But to take it a step further, one of the things that we would say is strategic community
Yeah.
engagement.
All right. Great, so we got two different things here. Strategic community engagement and setting board self-constraints. Anything else that we missed? All right, we're gonna repeat that process 2 more times, but it should be shorter because we got less to do. Next, you and your partner are gonna do the next 2. Progress and accountability 1 and progress and accountability 2. Go ahead with your group, decide where you fit on those next 2.
Cut to here and then you have to go back.
Where 15 more of the total quarterly minutes in the board.
Does not show.
Yeah, we do.
No.
Pretty sure Claudia does.
Bend.
Pretty sure Claudia does. Are you the only one tracking the time for our board?
Right now I am.
Claudia's not doing it?
Tracker on the
I thought Claudia
one
was
on the regular side.
this whole time.
She takes the minutes, but
Whenever I sign the
So do you
minutes,
count
doesn't it have
for us
how
on
much
this?
time? I know
I count for you. Yeah.
our.
so you
I
do?
know
Oh, well, I'm saying no,
Hinojosa,
we don't. Yeah, you're still.
they've mentioned
I don't think so either, because I know that we receive,
On
we
each-
most recently
I
have
don't
been
know, are they
receiving updates
I
on,
wasn't
That's why.
on our goals, constraints.
No, there we go.
Um,
And that was just, I remember
So that's a percent?
last time, last board meeting.
So
No, I think what Ben
They're
is,
doing,
I think Ben
Well,
is.
what we're doing
Yeah.
is-
was he the one, but we're not doing
Talking
it.
about the
Claudia.
during executive.
No, no.
But we're not doing it in,
Okay.
but are we
The
doing
next
it
one, we're gonna go to the
virtually
next
right
one.
now? Okay,
Oh, well, we have somebody from the
okay,
speak.
probably not, so you're right.
So, oh, so.
So we're next one?
I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
I haven't done it where every capital,
Two.
We could say Ben.
like the ones that are relevant.
Yeah.
I don't think so, because I know we've recently been receiving updates on the goals. So then one, well, let's see. Each student outcome has a,
Short one.
I think
Yeah, I'm with it.
We're already doing this, so we have a constraint at least once a year.
each constraint, what? So
Each
the board is
constraint at
preparing.
least once per year. Well, we're already doing this, so we haven't. No more than 2 student outcomes per month. Each constraint.
Yeah, I thought we did self-evaluate.
The superintendent
we
owns
did
the
it, but
monitoring calendar
We haven't finished
development.
it.
Board to adopt a calendar that monitors each student outcome
I'm
at
number
least 4
two.
times per year.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm at. Oh,
that, have we done
what you were
this?
talking about.
Okay, we just did it.
No,
Okay, we
right?
just bring starting something
Okay,
to
so
zero.
we did,
So if that's the case, then we'll go
but
wrong.
not based on.
Yeah.
And then the board evaluates, but does
Oh,
not
I
interfere
agree.
with progress. It does not interfere with progress toward improving student
Yeah.
outcomes.
Oh,
Two.
but it's also under, oh,
Two, right?
it's not the third bullet.
Well, I was starting at 5, but
Okay.
Under the second column.
No. The last three, no.
No, we're against superintendent evaluation.
we have not voted to approve the quarterly
Quarterly, no.
progress that we just started. So then the board performs self-evaluations using the LSG integrity system.
Which part were you looking at?
Performs a
Under number two,
self-evaluation. So then the board has performed a self-evaluation within the previous 12 months using a research
Putting skin
document.
on it.
We haven't done it with
Dead
the
skin.
ones.
That was the weirdest thing I've ever heard.
Oh, what we did with that 12 months. Did we-
Perform a superintendent annual evaluation no more than 15. That
Actually,
one?
we actually
We did.
Okay, but not with the goals.
Right. So the last one.
So on this one, because of the, this one, right? And this one,
Have we done a
I mean, we did those.
oh, I know.
We're having a little bit of trouble with here. Which we have. And then we did do an annual. We did do one most
So the
recently for him when we did it for also
implementation plan, would that
Motivate
be
Ian.
our SIPs? Or what is that?
So we're, I would say,
But we haven't seen, been provided with copies of the superintendent's implementation plans that include campus goals to make progress with
are
student
you,
outcomes.
I was just asking
I'm
what
here
the
in one.
superintendent's implementation plan was, and if it was
Not
a
at the
SIP,
campus level.
then
We received
we
information.
would have the one, and if not, if it's something different, maybe we could ask what.
All
We
right,
haven't
let's see
voted
where
to
we're at.
approve the superintendent's implementation plan.
Let's have a little conversation here. This time, we will start in the middle and go to the right. On progress and accountability 1, this is about time you spend focusing on your goals and your constraints. Where did our middle table give us?
We put a
Zero.
zero on that one.
0, why?
Because we still don't track our time in public meetings, identifying each minute according to the time tracker.
All right, a 0 because we do not yet track our time as a board.
Right.
For the same reason? Yep. And then
Same thing.
Same thing. That is true. I do track your time, and eventually you will do that, and we will talk about that today, actually. Does anyone want to guess what percentage of your time over the last 3 months was spent on focusing your goals and your priorities?
In the last 3 months,
Yep, January,
would-
February, March.
maybe like
15,
5
I'd say
or
15.
4%.
15%.
I see 4, 15%.
15.
The average amount, you'd be pretty close, 9.2%. But significantly more than
better
before you
than
had
nothing.
goals. And I think it will actually spiral really quickly once you actually start continuing to do this and tracking it. So kudos there. Okay, so number 1, 0 on that, we all agree. And then for
Question,
this,
Ben.
yes, please.
Because we've opted to do board honors during our regular board meeting, because the community is more accustomed to attending our regular board meetings, and because those are the meetings that generally, if they're viewed, those are the ones that are viewed. So we want to recognize our kids during the time where the chance opportunity for engagement is higher. Is that being counted against us, or is that being counted as part of student outcome goals?
It depends on what you're recognizing students for. If you are recognizing students for progress on your goals, so if you are, for instance, measuring early literacy and you are recognizing all of the kids who showed the most growth, that would count for your minutes. But oftentimes what we see is celebrations not aligned to goals. And they might be great celebrations. Those would count against your minutes. So there's multiple ways to do this, and you all can talk about the best way to do it. I'm not advocating that you should not celebrate kids, especially if that's a value of the community. But you might consider increasing the percentage of time or making sure that you actually are celebrating kids for meeting growth and moving towards their goals. That might be something to consider. If those are our priorities, it'd be great to celebrate kids for that and teachers for that as well. The other thing that you consider is even if you want to keep the celebrations at your board meeting because the community is used to that, there is still no reason you necessarily have to gavel in and have a quorum and start the meeting to do that. You can live stream it. You can have that celebration before the meeting and then just start the meeting afterwards. You can keep everything else exactly as is, and then it is not a public meeting. It is just a celebration that we are live streaming. It's not an official part of our minutes and our record, and you could even adopt a proclamation afterward if you wanted to. But there are lots of ways to do that. You can think about your celebrations, but that's
It's a good idea.
some thoughts I would give you for that.
Great. Thank you, sir.
All right, the other note here that I had when I was looking at it is I believe, Superintendent, you have a monitoring calendar that you follow.
Yes.
Has the board adopted that monitoring calendar?
I believe we did at the same time that we adopted the TPMs.
Right? You have that? All right. Let's go to the next one, Progress and Accountability 2. We'll start with Manny and Paul and then come around the front. Where'd we land with this one?
0.
0, and why?
We believed,
Well, I think one of the reasons why we put 0 was because we weren't aware about, well, not aware, but maybe we didn't recall the implementation plan. Or actually, as a matter of fact, one of the things that stood out to me was a copy of the implementation plan that included campus goals,
Yep.
the campus level. And I don't think, right? If I'm not mistaken. I mean, I don't know.
I don't think could that be part of the campus improvement plans that they approved at the beginning of last year? Is that what that's talking about?
So I can't answer this because I haven't seen them. It could be, it might not be. So I'll talk to you about the purposes. So real quick, before I talk about the purpose, what did you all score? 1 and
1.
1, okay. So it seems like one of the questions is, Did that happen or not? And it seems like we agreed yes because we did the campus improvement plan. No, maybe not because the board hasn't seen them or we might not remember them. The whole purpose of why it talks about the implementation plans and not voting to approve the plans themselves, but sometimes you have to actually legally adopt district improvement plans, campus improvement plans. So that's neither here nor there. Is if you set goals, and you have chosen to set goals on reading, math, 8th grade algebra, and college and career readiness, is in an ideal world, you don't want campus or district improvement plans that have different goals. You want the campus improvement plans to be aligned to the goals that you have set as a board and to see all that carry through. So my question would be, maybe it is in the campus improvement plans. In the campus improvement plans, are there goals for each of the 4 board areas that the board set? 3rd grade reading, 3rd grade math, 8th grade algebra, and CCMR. And I don't know. That's something that I think you all have to think about. My guess is probably not, because they had to be adopted before the board adopted its goals.
Right.
So they might have some things aligned. But I think it's something to think about as you think about next year is, okay, the board has these, we know what we're expecting to grow. Well then, when the board looks at campus and district improvement plans in the fall, show me how they're aligned to our board goals. And if they are, great, then we have definitely done this, because that does, now you're starting to align all your work. So that's the purpose of that. That's a great question.
When did we get the campus improvement plans?
We usually approve those, I believe it's in June, when those are approved. S- Yeah,
Okay. Okay,
yeah, that's right.
okay.
Okay, so I heard a 0 because we haven't seen campus improvement plans aligned to our goals.
Well, and I think you also brought up a great point about us adopting the campus improvement plans. And that was before our goals. So I think that you bring up a very valid point in terms of, are they aligned?
So does that change our 1s to a 0? Nods.
I think so.
Great. But also I hear about this, a very clear thing is next time, if you're like me, the first 5 years I was on the board, like, okay, cool, campus improvement plans, we do this every time. Having goals changes that, because now you're able to say, I'd love to see how each of the campuses are aligned to achieving our 8th grade algebra goal in middle school. So, all right. Any other thoughts on this one? Talk to your partner based on those 2 conversations. What are our next steps as a board? Talk to your partner. What 1 or 2 next steps would you want to take as a board?
Well, I think number 1 on this one is
Yes.
making sure that we're tracking
Yeah, true.
the amount of time that we are
Exactly right. And show how each campus is aligned to the district.
spending on certain outcome goals, and if that's something that can be reported,
Yeah,
like at
that's
the
true,
second
maybe in the
level.
minutes, yeah.
But they're not.
And then out here, I think it's
Need
just
to align
making
them.
sure that we're aligning those campus goals
So genius.
for the next school year with the ones that with the most recently adopted goals.
All right, we got 1 or 2 things? All right, let's start in the middle. What's one of those 2 things?
Time tracker.
Time tracker, all right?
Time tracker.
Time tracker?
We have put time tracker too.
All right then, clear next step. Last round, the last 3. So you've got systems and processes, advocacy and engagement, and synergy and teamwork. Go ahead, work with your team, identify where you fit. We ranged from 0 to 4 on the first one, 0 to 1 on the second one, 0 to 10 on the last one. So be curious to see where we land.
Not 2 hours per meeting.
Okay, so just.
So the board authorized public meeting in the last quarter that do not exceed an average of 4 meetings per month and average of 3 hours per meeting.
Which we did.
And an average of 5. I think the meetings, I don't know what they are on
I got
average, but we have been meeting, we haven't been staying till
Beat
11.
on.
The board has
Because
reviewed,
we have not
and then the average of 5
to
minutes.
discuss progress towards student outcome goals within each feeder plan.
And only adopt local policies pertaining to board work. I think we've done that. I think Not
Let's
all of
assume
them,
that one's-
but we are reviewing them
That
as
was-
they come and as they're recommended to
TASB, OTA.
Does this mean all of them? But then, like, if we look at for the adopted monitoring
Definitely not
calendar has not. The adopted, do we have,
Two-way between who?
has not been modified during the past quarter?
You say votes to accept monitor, because y'all don't vote to accept the monitor. We do that. Board
I think this means,
That's
how relevant that part is.
I don't think it's the monitoring calendar though. The school calendar,
this one?
not that one. I think
It
it's
says the board has a two-way
like a
communication, two-way
monitoring calendar for what, like for our student goals or systems
I
and
mean, now that
processes.
may
Kinda like
get
those,
picky. I don't know if we need a vote to accept them, or it's just
Okay.
part
Thank
of the
you.
presentation.
Ben,
So yeah, we're.
Yeah.
Ben, we have a question about the monitoring calendar. That's not the same thing as the
Yes.
academic school year calendar, right? The adopted monitoring calendar
What
has
do
not
you
been
mean by
modified.
monitoring calendar?
Well, even within 12 months, we haven't
Right.
been, had the community, the budget, that one too. 0. So that's community engagement too. And then we also had the one we're doing right now.
Oh, gotcha.
I'm gonna.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
Still room for improvement.
We have that
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
I don't know.
Not a
if we count,
one.
But it is, they are community meeting because of
The last.
Okay, gotcha.
That's what I'm saying about
Thank you.
and then we did listen and discuss the vision of the other ones.
So we're here. They have not exceeded
Well, let's go to this one too.
an average of 4 meetings per month.
Why we wouldn't
An
be
average of 3 meetings per hour. I
right at
think
time during the meeting.
per meeting, or 3 hours per meeting. I think that's
We haven't done
possible.
that. Yeah, so
An
it is.
average of 5 other topics per meeting. We do cover a good amount of topics when you get like reports and things like that. And the board has reviewed its existing local policies and only, well, it doesn't say all its existing local policies, just reviewed these. And only adopted local policies pertaining to work, which we have. Because we even
I saw that one
released
in all
some superintendent work, like for example, hiring admin.
Or I don't know about every 2 years.
So advocacy,
That's because I'm new, so I don't know if, what you guys.
and then on advocacy and engagement,
Yes.
students have included in at least students have been included in at least one Lone Star governance training or two-way community. No,
Agrees
the
that-
board displays and keeps an updated status of student
Not everybody.
goals and GPMs permanently publicly in the room in which the board most frequently holds regularly scheduled board meetings. And I don't.
Yeah.
The board has led or co-led at least one training. You know, right?
That's the only one I'm not sure about. That's the only one I'm not, because I don't know what the percentage is. How do we, yeah.
To recognize the complement of the students and staff, learning progress. I've never been able
Voted to
Is the information prior to one?
you reached your
Yeah, that's on.
exceeded.
Yeah, I ask a question, he lets everybody know what the question is, and what the answer is, right?
So it's
So then if that's the case, we move over here. The board has a two-way communication system in place with the board members at least once a year. Listen for and discuss the vision and values of their students.
Why not?
Listen and discuss the values of their
I would say we're,
community members.
okay,
But this is all in the last 3 months, right?
Last 3 months, yep. January,
we should ask.
So then no.
Yeah, how we're calculating that.
Because in the last 3 months, we haven't even had like meetings with community members.
March, talking by January, I don't have community meetings in January. The last 3 months, we've done it before.
All right, let's go ahead and get
And
started,
zero.
even if we're not fully done yet. We'll start with systems and processes. So this is about the general running of meetings and how those meetings last and move. So we'll start with Charles and Alice.
4.
4,
0.
0,
12.
12. Okay. Let's start with our 0 group. Why did you score it at 0? What do we think we were missing that didn't allow us to move
Well,
up?
because under the scoring of 1, the introductory statement says the board receives and votes to accept.
Oh.
So we're getting student outcome reports. We're getting everything listed there. However, if we look at our minutes, during the student outcome presentations, it says no action was taken. So we need to change that and initiate action on those items to accept.
All right. Now, does that change?
Yes.
All right, we agree. But if we were doing that, so if we make that change, and just to give you some heads up, the reason why it's important to accept instead of just hear it is it shows that the board has seen the data and agrees that it was a thoughtful monitoring report that shared that. In the absence of, and you're not accepting it if you like it or not. It's good data or it's bad data. Our kids are on track or off track. That's not what we're about. It's about accepting it because the superintendent gave an honest assessment of where our system is. We see that it allows it to have a public record that, no, the board actually did see that, as opposed to it was an item somewhere and we don't know where that is. So that's the reason for it.
Okay.
But if we did that, where might we be?
0. Oh,
Let's see,
No, if we did that, where would we go?
sorry.
12?
12.
12. And then our group that had 4,
Why didn't we go to 12?
right? There's a group that had 4.
We're at 12.
You had 12. You had 4.
We had,
What stopped you from going to 12 in that instance?
We didn't even talk about it. We just both had 4. And we said,
oh yeah, we both had 4, so we just went.
Oh,
together.
okay. You both had 4. One thing to think about, I think the one area that when I look at this is around reviewing your local policies. We're going to talk about that tonight because the board, there's a lot of local policies that probably haven't been reviewed in a while. The board should create some process by which it reviews its local policies regularly and decides if they're still necessary or not. But that's something you'll do tonight. So it seems like if we can make this one agenda change to accept, we might be at a 4 or a 12 pretty quickly. All right. So I'm going to add that to the staff monitoring reports. All right. For the next one, which is advocacy and engagement. This is about engaging with the community on a regular basis. Where did we score here? Which group would like to go first?
1.
I heard 2 zeros and a 1. Or 2 1s and a 0, sorry. All right.
They're wrong.
For our group that said 0, why did we say 0?
Well, we asked about if this is in the last 3 months, and in the last 3 months, there hasn't been community engagement activities.
Gotcha.
says 12
Okay.
months.
Let me, sorry, I might have confused you on this one. The quarterly report is looking at the last 3 months of meetings, but some of these do specify a time frame. So
Right.
superintendent evaluation in 45 days or in last 12 months. If it says it's a 12-month period, you don't need to think about the 3 months. So in this instance, it says that the board has not arranged any community engagement within the previous 12-month period. And this board I know has because it
Right.
happened last spring. So sorry for my
So
confusion.
yeah, no, sorry about that. So then in that case, we would go to 1.
All right. Seems like we all agree there.
Yes.
All right. What's the next thing to think about as we want to think about approaching 3 or 9 here?
We need to host community meetings
Yeah, community
to
engagement.
present
again.
student outcome, to discuss progress towards student outcome goals.
And this is interesting because this goes back to where we started originally. It's one thing to go to the community and ask them their feedback about setting the goals. But we probably owe it to our community to go back and update them. Here's the progress we're making. Here's where we're struggling. Here's what we're doing next. And it builds that ongoing conversation, I think, Manny, that you were referring to very early. All right. And the last one, who would like to share? Or everyone all at once?
0.
0,
1.
1.
We ran out of time, so we weren't.
All right, talk to us about why you scored 0 and not 1. Just as an FYI, you all scored 1 on this last time.
Because Mr. Rodriguez and Mr. Guerra take way too much time and don't, just kidding.
I was like, where's this going?
What?
We scored 0 because as we were looking under column 1, we do have policies, we have our board operating procedures. They were, I believe it was 2 months ago, adopted, voted to approve, et cetera. However, it does say that everybody has signed the ethics and conflict of interest statement, and I am not 100% confident that that is accurate. So, and I also wondered, because I think we get ethics and conflict of interest from like our accounting firm as well. And we complete those on a yearly basis. It's part of our audit requirement. So are we talking about that, or are we talking in alignment with our board operating procedures in signing that we agree to abide by that? Either way, I was unsure, so.
Unsure if we actually have all signed our conflicts.
Correct.
of interest disclosure.
What it's referring to specifically, and then since I was unsure there, I don't know that we've all signed it.
I took it as if you're doing work for the district, if your company's doing work for the district, then you're gonna sign that ethics and conflict of interest form.
Yeah,
Because we
so,
all do one yearly from the auditors.
Yeah, that's what I assumed too.
yep. So everyone does sign one yearly for the auditors? That would classify as this, in my opinion.
Okay.
Then, with that in mind, then that would change mine. I think we'd be at a 10.
10? Oh, wow, big
What?
jump there, all right.
Holy moly.
So our 0 went to a 10 real fast. That, you all agree?
I'm just thinking over
Wait a
just to
minute.
make sure.
And
You can give us like a minute.
Yeah, go through it. And remind me your score on this?
we have a 1
One.
because
Maintained.
we're not sure that the expectation has been met yet, where if I ask a question, that everybody is getting
And average
information
13%
from Jim.
Say that again, Alice.
The very last bullet on 3 that approaches, this is why I don't think we're past a 1. I don't know that we're all receiving the information from Jim equally. Does that make sense? I mean, we get our packet, we get stuff like that, but I think for the most part, you send us text messages and things like that, but is that happening 100%?
Let me just add a little bit of clarity about what this point means, and then you can discuss it. It's not to imply that if I see Jim in the hallway and hey, I heard like someone had this issue, was there a resolution? And he answers me, that I now expect him to go send an email to everybody to share that exact thing, because there's always going to be those one-off instances, whatnot. But it really refers to what you don't want is asymmetric information, where someone's asking for a lot of information from the district and it only gets sent to that one board.
Okay.
You want to create a process by which, hey, I need to know how our teacher retention is over the last 2 years. And if I ask that I don't just as an alone by myself get that information, or how much is this campus spending on X? Like, you might ask these questions, they might come up. It's whether or not the board has a process by which, if Paul asks for information about that requires like a response from a district, that everyone sees that question and that response, so you're not working with different information. It's not meaning that literally everything he says, he needs to copy down and send out.
Got it.
So my question really, as you think about this, my question would be, does Socorro ISD have a way in which if you have a question, you can send it in, and then in the board packet or whatnot, questions get answered and all the data gets provided, so all trustees see that and are part of that conversation?
We do. In addition to that, that was one of the driving intents behind transitioning to our workshops instead of the committee meetings.
Right.
Make sure that we all are able to see the agenda and the supporting information in advance. We're able to formulate questions, and that when we do ask questions, we can all hear the answers in a more efficient manner instead of placing the burden on the staff that, okay, now they have to, document some, formulation of an answer only to be followed, of course, with more, questions, but rather it can be a discussion that we can have in an open forum where we're all listening and engaging.
Okay, so let me just ask the question to the board. If that was the sticking point for you all about, I'm not sure if information provided to one is provided to all, given we have these new structures, the briefing structures, the updates, et cetera, do we feel generally that Socorro ISD has a process by which to do this and make sure all board members are informed as opposed to certain board members being more informed?
Yeah.
Yep. Yes. Yes. Okay. So we feel good about that one. Did we maintain an attendance of 70%?
How are we measuring that?
Board meetings. How many trustees are present at any board meeting for?
be good, though. I don't think 3 of us have ever, right? That's been like the most?
But that's for one meeting,
Exactly, that's for one meeting. This would be the aggregate
Oh,
over
The
the average
average.
for everything.
right? On average,
Do we know
in the
where
last
we're
3
at?
months.
We've
the last
had,
3 months.
I think we're good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're good.
yeah.
Yeah. Basically, on this one, if you average one person out per meeting, then you're met the 80%. If you average 2 people out, you met the 70%. If you average 3 people out, you did not
Oh,
meet
we're
it.
good then. Yeah, we're good.
So, okay, sounds like we met that. All right, let's go through 9. Did we meet the 80%? You did. You have,
Previous
like,
3
occasionally
months.
one person, maybe 2 have missed, but not consistently and not. So you're definitely over 80%. Have you adhered to all policies governing board operating procedures? Okay. Has everyone completed their statutorily required trainings?
We'll find out in April.
When they read your name,
We'll find out next
We'll
month.
find out in April, all our trainings.
all right? And then, has the board led the completion of Lone Star governance tasks? Not the superintendent. Meaning like setting goals. All right. Then, seems like we're at a 9. We agree on a 9 here. On 10, you completed the workshop. For sure, I can attest to that. Some of y'all multiple times. All right. Do we agree that all board members have adhered to board constraints during these previous 3 months?
Discussed that
We don't know the
have.
constraints.
Don't have them.
So we're at 9.
All right, so we're at 9. Great, thank you all for that. And the last one, synergy and teamwork.
Oh, I think
Wait,
it.
that was
Wait, that was the
That
last
was
one.
synergy.
I just
We're
got,
that good.
I'm like, oh, man.
my apologies, my
That's how
apologies.
good we are.
Did we skip advocacy and engagement?
No.
Yeah.
No, it was the same thing.
did.
Yeah, we were at 1 there. Or w-
Move 9 down.
Yes, 1. Okay, my bad. All right. So then, based on this, here is what I've identified here as your next steps. Tell me if this sounds right. We want to identify and plan some strategic community listening and input to discuss our goals and build buy-in. We need to set board constraints. We need to learn how to use the time use tracker, and we got to change our agenda to accept the monitoring reports. Does that sound correct? All right, and so what I would recommend is, based on those 4 things in each of those categories, you aim to move up in that. And so what I think that would be, my first question on the first ones, you're at 12s on the goals. Do you think you have enough time in the next 3 months to really get broad community ownership based on that?
Not in.
Okay, not in 3 months, so maybe a year, but not in 3 months, that's fine. That's part of the reality. In terms of the constraints around board setting self-constraints, seems like we can do that within the next 3 months. So that should at least move us up to a 9. And then, this 4 is the case there. So 5, again, back to the ownership. Some growth to do there, so that'll stay a 4. Then on the progress and accountability ones, this is where we're gonna track our time. Do we think we can start tracking our time? We got our calendar? And do you think we can get at least 10% of our minutes focused on our goals and our priorities? Do you think it's
Yes.
possible to get 25% over the next 3 months? Maybe, maybe not.
Yes.
It's going to depend on the board honors, I think.
Are we on progress and accountability? Is that-
Yes. So the thing
I
is,
think we can aim for 12.
Okay.
We can aim for
aim for
25%.
12. Let's see if we can get there. 25%. It's actually very feasible if you think about how you structure and dive into your goals and constraints. So, all right. Progress and accountability 2 was around the plan. So it sounds like we need to wait until at least June when we look at our campus improvement plan. So that may or may not go to 1.
Right.
And then we had system and processes. We already talked about that one. That's about accepting the monitoring reports, would jump us up to a 4 or a 12 almost immediately. No, sorry, I'm on the wrong one. I'm
A 4.
4. Got it. And then advocacy engagement, the last one. This is round, we are at a,
Adopting our constraints. People to 10.
we're at a 9. Self-constraint should get us to a 10. All right. Kudos, y'all. From a 1 to a 42.
Wait,
I mean,
pause.
you
1 to
missed one,
68.
didn't you?
For advocacy and engagement, you said 10
Advocacy, we think we can get to a 10 on advocacy
Yes.
engagement?
on masters? Is that where we?
So what that would look like, we need to build out what that community process looks like. We need to make sure
But I
that.
don't think we scored it.
Oh, then let's go through. What do we score at?
We scored it as a 1,
Yeah.
and so I think we maybe could get to a 3 because of the discuss progress toward student outcome goals in the community.
Yeah, we scored it at a 3, not at a.
So
said
we were
9.
at a,
No, we were scored at a 1.
we were scored at a 1, and we can get to a 3.
Yeah, because and I think the conversation is,
Yeah,
the board did have the two-way communication within that 12-month period.
Right.
And used it to set their goals.
Yes.
But a 3 means now you got to go back, and you got to
Correct.
talk about progress, especially at the campuses with low-performing campuses, to make sure they know what's happening. So this is like, that follows. So we get to at least a 3,
Correct.
and then to get to a 9 would be around, do we want to have this same kind of training and train our community on the framework that we're putting in place?
Right.
All right. So what will happen next? I will take this, I will send this to Claudia, and you all will add this to your agenda meeting for April to adopt. Congratulations, y'all, that's huge growth. I'll expect the conservators to talk about that in their next conservator update. All right, so with that, we will move on to some of the fundamental work that'll help move us in that direction. In your packet, you also have board operating procedures. So as a quick review, last time we met in January, we actually went through and talked about all of the different elements of board operating procedures. I made all of the adjustments that you all shared, sent that out to each of you individually. Every single person, kudos, gave me either a thumbs up or gave a lot of feedback on this. And so I've taken into account a lot of that, and it's highlighted in here as a public document. I think it's available on the website as well. Nothing is finalized here, but these are your operating procedures. So I'm going to walk you through each of these. There's a number of areas where came back where different trustees had different thoughts about this. I will walk you to those, and we'll have a conversation about what you as a board want to do with each of these. So feel free to stop me at any time if you have something else. But if you flip the first 3 pages, the first place we will stop is page 4, section 1. I'm actually going to pull this up on the screen so you have it here as well. Here we go. So, page 4 includes some removal of some language that was unnecessary, that's really not there. But I think a big question that came up is, are these board operating procedures just out of nowhere? Are they part of our policies, et cetera? And so the clarifying statement that was added here is actually, these board operating procedures is just taking your local policies and putting it into one place so you don't have to go searching through different policies for that. So this line aims to add that this policy procedures are a compilation of those relevant legal and local policies. And so when the board eventually considers adopting new operating procedures, you will also adopt changes to your policy to align with what you've discussed here. But I think that was one clarifying point that I thought was a really thoughtful addition. Questions on that? All right, then if you will flip that to the next page. I forget who raised it specifically, but noted the responsibilities on the board is in Socorro ISD, the board also hires and oversees an internal auditor. Is that correct?
Correct.
So we need to add that element here, which I will work with the team to do, about the board actually hires and manages that internal auditor in addition to the superintendent. Any questions there? All right, so if you keep going on, there's conversation about priority setting. At the bottom of this, there was a request that made a lot of sense to say we shouldn't just talk about our responsibility and priority setting, but we should also be clear for the community and for others when we revisit our priorities. It is in the last year before they expire. We shouldn't wait until they expire to set our next goals. We should spend that last year figuring out what our next set are. Or if we meet one of the goals or priorities and it's no longer a priority, we should be able to move it off. Or if the context changes, for instance, TEA or the state changes how CCMR is done, you might want to think about redoing your goals at that time. So we added in those specifics around when the board revisits its procedure. So before they're going to expire, or if there's changes, or you meet one of the goals. Questions there? All right, later on that page is around board officers and duties. Multiple people shared with me that it was confusingly written here. So made it clear that even though elections don't happen every year, board officer elections do happen every year, and those happen in May, I believe. So trying to align that based on your current procedures. All right. The next one is on section 3, board member ethics and standards. So these are currently located in your BBF local. These are things that Socorro ISD has added in the past, things like equity and attitude, trustworthiness in stewardship, honor and conduct, and a number of other things. I heard multiple trustees say both ways. Some say, we don't need that, that's, we are going to do that anyways, we don't need to write it here. I heard others say it's really important, I'd love to keep it there. So that's an open question for this board is, do you feel like you want to keep that in your policy and leave it in your board operating procedures as a grounding point for trustees? Or do we take it for granted and remove it? So that's an open question for this board. I heard board members discuss either way, and I'm curious about the board's thoughts.
I'm personally one of the people that said I have a problem with removing it. I think I've had, it's my 3rd year. I've lived through a couple of years of very difficult governance, and I see what it's like to have governance that respects each other, and I don't take anything for granted. I know that we've worked very hard at respecting each other, and not only do I feel like this is important that we maintain, it's important that we revisit our standard of SOP every year, and that we sign this too. Because I think many times we assume that the incoming board members understand this and understand what is expected of them. But I know that when I came in, I didn't know. And if somebody had said, here, read this 100%, sign it after you read it, and if you have any questions, sit down and maybe meet with the president or meet with whoever the president is at the time to clarify any questions and expectations. If this isn't met, I also requested that we add something to, it's not a consequence, but what happens when we don't do that? To me, it's just, it's really important.
Okay.
But that's just, I'd rather leave it so that we protect future boards as well.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Other thoughts?
Wholeheartedly, I agree with what Ms. Garcia is saying. We shouldn't take it for granted.
Great.
We shouldn't take it for granted at all.
I also agree about keeping it. I think it's elections happen, and we're, maybe in the next 10 years, this school district will be led by different board members, and why not? I mean, for me, it's why remove this? I mean, I know that it's we understand it now, and we try to we do prioritize it now, but that's we're fortunate to be in a place where I think we have good folks that live to this, and not that we won't in the future, but it's just it doesn't hurt to keep it.
All right. Hearing pretty overwhelming support to keep it. Anyone not in agreement with that? Just a note, in this also is the requirement that A, board operating procedures are part of the training of new orientation trustees, and B, that they must certify that they comply with them. So, and I will note, just from my own personal coaching, the time to adopt board operating procedures is not when you need them. It's to do it beforehand. So, okay. Any other thoughts here? Feels like the direction is to leave these.
I see that it's marked to exclude it.
Yep, that was just to get the conversation going.
Okay. So I'm gonna get the conversation going.
All right. Carry on.
I'm ambivalent.
Okay.
I really don't feel strongly one way or the other. I will tell you, I like that it's there. Okay? What I don't like are what are the consequences if it's not followed. So words to make us feel good, to me, everybody should know this walking in. Because in the instance where those choose not to follow this, then having this document, it doesn't make a difference. So unless somehow it can be enforced, to me, it makes us who choose to or who would abide by it anyways, and I can tell you that the two people who spoke up would absolutely follow this day in and day out without it ever being documented. But how are we going to enforce it?
Yep.
You know, so
That's a great point. So let's actually talk about that because that is later on in this section. It is called reporting and resolving concerns. So I think it's 2 pages below that. Just as a note, the only people that can police the board are the board itself. Nobody, the superintendent cannot do that. No one else can do that. Only the board can do it. And so what we have now, which is a new addition based on our conversation the last time, is a specific set of 4 steps about what, to answer this question. What does the board do when anything in this board operating procedure or our local policies is not being followed? And here is what we currently have written. It's the first recommendation, if someone feels that one of those elements or anything else is not being followed, is there should be a conversation between the trustee who is concerned and the trustee who they feel is violating.
This language that it's drafted language, right? So this is
Everything is drafted, and you can always change it as you see fit. Is first, those 2 trustees talk. If it cannot be addressed that way and it is still a problem, then it gets elevated to the board president or vice president if the president is the one in concern for that. And then that president or vice president have that conversation separately. If it is still ongoing at that point, then the third one would be to add a closed session item under this title, Deliberation of Duties of a Public Officer, for a closed session conversation of the entire board around this to work out what needs to happen. And if it is still not followed, then number 4 is possible disciplinary or remedial action. Now, you are bound by some laws here. You can't do whatever you want to elected officials, but you do have some specific things. You can require training. You can remove trustees from board-appointed offices or committees as you see fit. You can issue a formal reprimand called a censure in a public setting. So these are things that you can do to take those steps, but to do any of these, the board has to be the one to do. So that is what we currently have drafted. There was a note from a trustee around, can we add something about limiting the speaking time of a trustee? You'd have to check with legal counsel. I don't think you actually can place different rules on some trustees than others in a public setting. But I would recommend controlling for that just through how you operate generally as a board, that one trustee shouldn't be able to take the floor for as long as they want from everybody else.
And I made that comment, but I was thinking more when it becomes counterproductive, when it becomes an argument as opposed to just asking a question, or when it becomes insulting, when it becomes, that's kind of what I was thinking. Does the president have any authority to say?
The board president does have that authority under
Okay.
Robert's Rules of Order.
Okay.
For requiring specific training, what if the board member does not do the training?
Then the board would continue down, could issue a formal reprimand, it could remove from committees, et cetera.
My microphone.
Doc?
Yeah, this is a perfect example. There's this kind of matter, there's always 3 answers to it. Legally, the legal answer is there's not much you can do. Very small set of parameters that you can do. And there's a political answer. He's an elected official, or she's an elected official. And, that creates a whole nother storm. And then there's the practical answer, and how you really going to actually implement or execute it. So I tread lightly on these things, but I've even heard of some districts that really looked at everything that a board member does and what is just very specific to be able to do their job on the dais. And then what are privileges that board members kind of get. I've seen boards take privileges away. I like athletic pass. Parking pass. Things that don't keep them from doing their job, but also send a message that, hey, wait a minute. We don't, your behavior is creating a hardship for this district. So just tread lightly on it. But know, have something in your quiver. But it's better to talk about this now than if one of y'all are misbehaving. And so then you got to talk in front of them, you know. So I would look at the concept of what is a privilege rather than something to be able to execute their job. So that's the comment I have on that.
And if I may, I think this is, I personally like this because I've seen it in other school districts across Texas, where and like exactly as you've outlined it, I've seen it to the point to where it gets to step 4. That's the worst possible case scenario, but it does also set an expectation, right? And I've seen it work in other districts. There's examples of it happening out there in school districts, and the one that comes to mind for me is the one in Bexar County. And it's not fun. I look at that, instance, and I just think to myself, well, I see what caused it. I've read on it and all that stuff. So, personally, I appreciate this being drafted.
Yep. Thank you.
Mr. Smith, you had a comment earlier? You were going to say something, and
I slipped my mind.
Did this come back to addressing that these aren't just words on paper, but they're actually steps that we can take?
absolutely. And I wanted us to be thoughtful
Yeah,
about it. So again, like I started, I like that it's there.
yeah.
I like that it's documented on what actions can be taken if they're not followed. I just wanted to be sure that we were considerate of it.
Yeah.
And that we
I think considerate and
Thoughtful.
consistent.
But at the same time, some of those board members, we lived it. We went through it.
Yes.
So do you need the majority of the vote?
You do need a majority
So
vote.
that's an issue right there, because we didn't have the majority of the vote. So what happens then?
What happens then is, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, a majority of a board can do a lot of things, good and bad. And there are consequences that comes with that and costs that comes with that, and that is what it is. And unfortunately, sometimes when that happens, you end up having to deal with Dr. Hinojosa. So,
Yeah. And that's, I think, what my mentality is. I'm thinking future.
yeah.
We got jabbed on
And
our governance.
what I would say is, if this kind of goes back to our very first session when we talked about Lone Star governance, and either I'm the genesis of change or they're the genesis of change. If there's a majority, I can't do anything. But what I would actually posit too is this board can do a lot. You can raise the level of expectation in your community about what to expect. Community members should expect us to come to you and ask you about what's happening and tell you how our kids are reading and doing math. And if you ever see a board that's not doing this and not coming out to you and talking about this, and is in the weeds on other things, hold them accountable. You can, and what I've seen is as communities and boards start doing that, people go, oh, I like this. I like hearing regularly from my trustee. I want more of that. You can actually build the system that avoids that without having to say we can't do that. All right. Any other questions here? Seems like we're going to leave this, maybe add to Dr. Hinojosa's point, in addition to removing the trustee from board-appointed offices or committees, we could add something, or privileges that I might get, but the board will decide those on an individual basis if it gets there.
Mr. Mackey, you mentioned the word
Ma'am.
censure. Should we add that word there? That way we could, if anything, we could Google what that is and give us ideas.
Yeah, we could do that. I would recommend just doing it in this, issuing a formal reprimand or
Yep.
censure. Interchangeable. Yep.
Ben, and I was going to ask you, so compliance with operating procedures, board self-constraints, and reporting and resolving concerns, all of this came from language, I assume that from what other board operating procedures also have included in them, right? Okay.
And just general best practices. And the board self-constraints go to what we talked about earlier. We should have these constraints that these are commitments we make every year as a board, and this is how we're going to abide by it. We're going to follow what's written in our BDF or BFF policy around our behavior. All right, if you keep on going, the next one is around conflicts of interest. So you currently do conflicts of interest per the legal definition, which is by law, you must do that. I believe that's all in your policies. One note here was around, should a trustee recuse themselves from voting on an item that is business from someone who gave them a campaign donation? You must recuse yourself if they give you $250 as a person. If I give you $250, you must recuse. That fits conflict of interest. But what is silent under the law is campaign contributions. So if I am a law firm, for instance, and I donate $1,000 to your campaign, you are by law allowed to vote on my contract. But this board can choose to put in a rule that says basically, we're going to count campaign contributions as this, and trustees should recuse themselves. So I think that's a question. There was a comment around not including this, fear of that it overshadows First Amendment rights of people who donate to campaigns. I will preface this, all of this will be looked at by your lawyers before you vote on it, so I wouldn't worry about that. But I think this is just more of a general question about, do we feel like that's something we want to mention in here about campaign contributions and recusing from vendors who have business before the board? Thoughts?
To recuse ourselves from, to say, for example, my campaign received, and so number one, I think it's important to understand a campaign is completely separate from what you do officially in your official capacity, right? In some way, in one way, shape, or form. But I think in the case that, for example, I were to receive a donation of $1,000 from a company that does work with the school district, then I would have to recuse myself from that vote at all.
Yeah, so for instance, essentially what this is, and you can decide whether you want to do it or not, is if Ben Mackey Construction gave you a $1,000 donation and we do work with the district, when Superintendent Vasquez brings a contract and says, okay, we're going to recommend that Ben Mackey Construction build this building, that would be, if you've received more than $250 as a campaign contribution from that, you should recuse yourself from that vote.
Yeah, I think that for me, the way that I see it, the $250 threshold is way too low. That's number one. Number two, I see from our local governments, for example, like the city of El Paso, they report the campaign contributions that, for example, in this case, city council members receive in an effort to be transparent. But that doesn't recuse council members from voting on items that those, organizations or individuals work in their capacity of the work that they do with the city of El Paso. So I think it has a good intention to it, but I just think that the threshold that is placed, the 250, is not. I don't think that it's feasible. And number two, I think that there's other ways to be more transparent about that.
Okay, is your recommendation to change the threshold or strike it entirely?
For me, strike it entirely. And if, I think it's pending a conversation in terms of, what are other options that we have to be more transparent. This is, I think, like I mentioned, valid concern. And I can see why, it could have been recommended, but I also think that there's other options that we can explore.
Okay, thank you.
What happens if that company goes to every board member and gives a contribution? And
Yeah,
then we adopt it, and then no member can vote.
Yeah, that would be extreme circumstance. Usually what it would recommend is if people see this, they don't give the same level of contribution across the board to hope. They don't see their contribution like as a way to hopefully get you to support this. I'm not saying all companies do that, but people and companies make contributions when sometimes it's just pure alignment. Sometimes they're hoping that it aligns with their interests as well. So that's a good question. You would probably be stuck and have to waive your operating procedures to do that in that case. But
I agree with Manny. And I understand this particular statement and the desire maybe to include it. But I also want our board operating procedures to be aligned with our policies, and we don't have a policy that dictates this. So now we're, say, superseding, our policies, and then it hasn't been. This has not been a problem in the past, and I believe we have policies, practices, systems in place that prevent someone. I mean, think about the steps for a trustee to have undue influence in the selection of a specific vendor. That means, first and foremost, simply stated, we'd be doing superintendent work and not board work. This entire conversation and all the amount of time that we've invested in Lone Star governance is about doing board work, not superintendent work. We would have to interfere with the work of the staff and the procurement processes that we have in place and influence the review and documentation that goes around it. Or we would have to, in a very public setting, go against whatever the administrative recommendation is. And those administrative recommendations are coming from people who are most invested and professionals in that particular procurement area. And we would, again, very publicly have to disagree and maybe move to take an action that is contrary to what the administrative recommendation, that is being presented to us. So, and just for those reasons, I think doing something like this, free speech aside, I also agree with that. But it tends to identify an issue that does not exist, and we've invested so many time and put practices in place to prevent this. Let's not give, the image that there's a concern.
all right, seems like I'm hearing support to do this. I will just note, and I'm not saying, so it sounds like, and this is totally fine, this is totally the board's decision to say, we don't think that's a problem, we think there's a lot of other things. I will note, there are other options for board members that have happened consistently. Is it's not always in public. It's I'm going to call up the superintendent and say, I see you're bringing this vendor, and I think it's a better choice to pick this other vendor. That is a real thing that happens in districts across the nation.
No.
So that is, I would flag that as so. But again, does this explicitly control for that? Maybe, maybe not. You would have to go through that process. But again, a lot of this is about supporting, like saying which direction you're going. And what I'm hearing is it's not an issue. And there's other questions around that. So it seems like we're moving towards striking that.
I would also add this is a complicated matter because words matter. And conflict of interest is a term of art. In other words, there is and even if you have a conflict of interest, and like we had my best board member ever in the whole world, #1 Hall of Fame, Jack Lowe. He was the board president of Dallas for a long time during my first tenure. And he ran the biggest HVAC company in Dallas. And they were the best. They were the only good one. And the other board members used to wear him out because he would say, look, I'm going to recuse myself. I'm going to go out. I'm not going to be here. But the staff brought the only good HVAC vendor in the whole city of Dallas. So this is a slippery slope. So it's good to just be smart about this. If it becomes an issue, be ready to deal with it. But it's a term of art that Joe Sixpack does not understand. Even if you do everything right, there's still going to be a perceived conflict of interest. So it's good to, be careful with it. And if it becomes a problem, then you as a board need to address it. But normal people don't understand what conflict, they just throw it out all the time and see if something sticks.
All right. So it sounds like we have some direction on that. We'll strike that and handle that through other areas. We'll now move on to section 4. There was one note, the first part of this, and we talked about it last time, was this idea about do we want to have a community orientation once a year or so? It doesn't actually specify, as it does, actually, annual basis in the spring, that we invite community members to learn about our goals, our constraints, how we think about governance, our monitoring, like doing those community listening sessions and talking about some of this. There was a request to eliminate this from a trustee, but wanted to see if this is something the board wants to commit to or wants to remove. Is doing
Wait,
an annual
Ben-
spring community orientation about.
Ben, if I may, we discussed previously conflicts of interest and that recommended language that was entered.
Yep.
But then there's also trustee vendor engagement, campaign endorsements and engagements, and outside organizations connected to trustees.
Yes.
I'm not sure if we discussed that or if that was also included as a
so
part of all
let's
of
go
that.
back. The reason I didn't flag that for discussion is we went through that last time. Nobody had any additional concerns or questions, or they didn't raise anything, so it hasn't changed since
Okay.
the last time we saw it. But I'll just quickly voice it over there. Is essentially the trustee and vendor engagement. Both of these are relatively aligned to legal processes also, so not so much of choice. Trustee and vendor engagement is that trustees should not engage with district vendors about district business unless it's expressly necessary. The superintendent manages the vendors unless they are contracted explicitly by the board to provide board services, like a legal firm providing the board services, which is a very rare thing. The vast majority of contracts you approve report to the district and vis-a-vis the superintendent. So this is to control for, there's a construction project happening at one school that superintendent and his team are overseeing. But I thought I think the colors are wrong hue of purple, so I'm gonna go try to call up my friend who works there and say, you got the wrong hue. So that's what that's referring to. And then the outside organizations, this is like, trustees volunteer, or they engage, or they have other organizations. This essentially just says that no organization should be privileged by knowing you. That if I volunteer for the Boys and Girls Club, I shouldn't be able to go and get the Boys and Girls Club free access to schools where no other organization can. Is essentially what those two are referring to. But that's why I didn't flag that, because we talked about it last time, and there was no comments or changes on it.
All right, gotcha. Thank you.
So back to the community orientation. Is this something that the board wishes to have in here and wishes to do, an annual community orientation, like a community listening session to talk through goals and progresses and framework, or no?
Well, I mean, if I recall, part of what we agree is that we need more community engagement, and to strike this would be contrary to what we discussed and what we agreed to in the beginning. So.
All right, so I hear,
Keep
keep it. All right. If we will continue onward,
I just want us to be clear, though, on what that statement says.
yep,
It says, community members should have access to clear and accurate information about the role of a trustee and how governance operates in Socorro ISD. To support transparency, support community understanding, cultivate, inform future leaders. So it doesn't say provide community meetings about the progress on student outcome goals. It doesn't say share with the community what our outcome goals are. It says provide community and those interested in future board service with information on the role of the board, what our function is, how the board works, etc. So I don't have a problem
yeah.
with that statement at all. I, again, just want us to be clear on what that is saying we're gonna do. So that will be above or in addition to the student outcome, progress, communication to the community.
So I'm thinking about like recommendations. Is a recommendation to either leave it and just recognize it, which you could read this. I think it would be reasonable to read it about, if you're talking about the role of a trustee, it's hard to talk about the role of a trustee in Texas without saying your responsibility is to set goals and talk about the progress. So you could read it in which it's implied, but we could also just make it explicit and say, here are some of the topics that this will cover. It will be focused on governance practices, what the role of a trustee is, our progress towards our priorities, et cetera. We could make it a little bit more open to be more inclusive.
And that's probably good because the community has no idea what our role is
Yeah.
as trustee. If they're thinking, oh, my son's not playing, he's not a starter, let me call the board member up. That's what they're thinking our role is.
Yep.
So maybe if we briefly mention it or talk about it as a community, they have an idea.
Yeah, no, that is the recommendation. Most people do not know what the role of a trustee is until you start telling them what it is and showing them what it means.
Yeah.
Great, okay, we can make some additional language there. All right, now if we'll flip a few pages to section 5, board meetings, we have updated this since the last time we talked to include what you talked about around board briefings and board meetings, so congratulations on that shift. But there are 2 areas flagged, so trustee requests for agenda items and pulling things off of the consent agenda. So what we talked about last time is that to add agenda items, what this is saying is 3 board members make a written request to the board president via email or whatnot that we want to add this agenda item to talk to. Similarly, removing items from consent, if something is on the consent agenda, instead of waiting till the minute and bringing something off, it takes 2 trustees to submit it beforehand to say, we agree, me and Alice agree that we should pull this item off for further discussion. The reason for both of these that we discussed last time is why you would sometimes want multiple trustees to add something to the agenda is going back to what we talked about one trustee holding hostage the meeting. If I alone can put anything I want on the agenda, I could fill that agenda up, in theory, a lot, to talk about a lot of different things that the board may or may not find valuable. Similarly, if I can't get one other person to say, this is a voting item, and nobody else agrees that this is worth our time discussing because everybody else agrees on the item, it might not be worth spending a lot of community time on at a meeting. Like, that person can still go talk about it, et cetera. So that's the reason for both of these. The concern raised by one trustee was that, does it restrict the free speech of any trustee as an elected official, et cetera? There is some guidance from TASB that says, we think that this could be the case, so you might want to consider one. But I will also say, TASB guidance is not law, and I would recommend you talk to your lawyers and think about what you would want to do and how you would want to organize. I will say both of these are a very common rule throughout Texas. But I think both of these, the purpose of this is to ensure that it takes at least 2 people, 2 of you, to decide we're going to spend significant amount of time on an item rather than one person having that power on their own. But both of those are up for discussion. So right now we have it that if you want something that's not on the agenda, sure, you can ask President Nahara to put it on, and he might choose to do so because the board president gets to set the agenda. But if he says, no, that's not a part of our focus, we're not focusing on it, well, then you got to get 2 other people to agree to put it on, and then it gets put on.
And then what happens if there's a board, like I've heard from before, where there's not, agreements between them and there's kind of teams, and then they can't get that,
So that's a great point, because oftentimes I think board policies don't even talk about this. They just say the agenda is put by the superintendent and the board president, or there might be a steering committee or whatnot. In which case, you're out of luck if you're that. What's best is for you to define what the process is so everybody knows. Me as an individual can't just go add something by myself if nobody else wants it. But by writing something like this, you're actually giving power to the minority to say, you got 3 people. The board president can no longer say no, it must be added to the agenda. So it kind of makes it clear what is the process to get something on the agenda.
If I recall, I think last time that we had this discussion, I think there was agreement in leaving it requiring board members, or at least 3 board members, to make a written request to either the superintendent's office or to the board president to add the agenda item within the next 30 calendar days. And I mean, we discussed why I think it was important for us to do that. And I just think about any other governing body that may have a majority, or may be dealing with a strong minority, or maybe they have a thin majority. I just think about it in the sense of why would you also even, why would you give additional power to the minority? And if it's just going to stall, board work, if it's not going to result in a strategic use of our time. So I think for me, based on the discussion that we had last time, I would be in favor of just keeping it as is, just to reiterate my position on this.
Yep. And so again, I think the way to think about this is you are a body. You only have power as a body. And every body, for the most part, especially larger bodies, I know, there are rules before getting something on the agenda. So what you're essentially saying is, if 1 or 2 people alone are the only ones that want to talk about something, there is not a path to do that unless the district agrees in terms of the president and the superintendent. But at 3, even though it's still a minority, they now have a right to get something on there for a public discussion, even though if the other 4 don't agree, it won't pass. And then at 4, not only could you get something on the agenda, you could pass it if you want. So basically, it kind of gives this gradual thing. So, okay, thank you for that. Seems like that is one. Go
If
ahead.
we're gonna have where we need somebody else, I think it should be set to 2. Just
Okay.
because if the board is split 5-2, and if it was like Michael and Paul, with the previous boards, and it happened to be 5 against them, I think it should be 2.
I don't. I think it should be 3. I think the way that I see it is, I know my colleagues, and if there is an item, I know that there was some concerns that were brought up last time about, there may be an item that I want to bring up. I may talk to Paul, and then I talk to Michael, thinking that maybe Michael will be in agreement, but then it results that he's not. And then I have to go to another trustee, and that there's concerns about like us violating the Open Meetings Act and whatnot. And I can view where like the concern for 2 trustee members would be required, but also I think at the same time, I would like to think that I know my colleagues enough to where I know who I can go to. But I mean, that's just kind of.
These colleagues.
Just to answer that, because this is.
But I'm not
always-
sure if that's the same. If we're getting at the same thing.
Let me just frame this. This is always a question that's come up every time I've done this with boards. I will posit this by saying, I am not a lawyer, and you're a lawyer. You should definitely look at this. But almost every board that I walk through with this asks the same question about, well, if it requires 3 and the first 2 people say no, is it walking quorum if I go and talk to the other ones? Every lawyer has ever responded to that in Texas and said, no, it is not, because what the Open Meetings Act is talking off scenes about action the board is going to take and how we're going to get the same votes. In these instances, you're not actually talking about the validity of the item itself. You're just simply saying, I think we need to have a public discussion about this. Will you help me add it to the agenda? That does not constitute a violation because you're not actually discussing the merits of it. You're talking about, I think this is a really meaningful thing that we should talk about this procurement contract or something, and then you go through and get it. So that's what every lawyer that I've seen tells boards it's actually not. You could talk to all 6 other trustees and say, I need to get this on the agenda. I think this is important. Will you support getting it on the agenda for the public discussion to come later? So that's the open meetings. What I'm actually hearing here is, at what amount of trustees do we want to give power to set the agenda and add other things to it? So obviously, if I as an individual have the power singly to add things, whatever I'm passionate about, I can add to the agenda tomorrow, and we all will have to talk about it, regardless if any of you support it or not. That does take time. It takes your energy. It takes the community's energy. It takes staff time. They spend less time in classrooms and doing that because they spend more time preparing for each of those agenda items. So there's a real cost to that. Obviously, having 2 trustees agree, that shrinks the list, right? Because now it's not everything I want. It's only everything that I can convince somebody else to do. So less time on these items, but I can still probably get someone to agree on them. And think about, for every item you add, less time the staff will spend in schools, more time the staff will spend on your item. So there's a cost to that. Staff members, I don't know how much that.
If the item is not related to
Even if the item is related, they will spend a lot of time. I don't know how much time staff spend preparing for each item.
It's, yeah, time consuming.
It doesn't,
Hours at least, yeah.
if we're talking about adding items to the agenda, and depending on what this says, and it really doesn't matter what the agenda item is, I could say, I want to discuss on whether we should mandate Mr. Vasquez to wear a tie at every single meeting that we come to. And if it takes one person, then guess what? I can add that to the agenda, right? If it takes 2 people, then all I have to do is say, hey, Manny, I think it's important for Mr. Vasquez to wear a tie to every single meeting that he goes to. I want to discuss that on the agenda. Will you support me in placing that on the agenda? If you say, yes, I will, okay, then it gets on the agenda. That's not a discussion about the merits of it. That's not a discussion about the action to be taken on it. It's just, will you support me in placing that on the agenda? And Manny can say yes or no. If Manny says no, then I can ask Paul.
Right.
I can ask Ms. Macias. I can ask Ms. Margarita until I meet the number. In my experience, it's always been, so Doesn't necessarily have to be critical to the success of the students of our district. It doesn't need to be critical to the success of Mr. Vasquez as a superintendent. It just something that we can add to the agenda. I've always been, up until it was made very clear that it was not during a difficult time, I was always under the impression that it took 3 to get, if I wanted to have something placed on the agenda, I had to get 2 other trustees to agree that it was something that we should spend time on. And basically, because if it is something that other people support spending time on, you have 3 people who agree that it should be placed on the agenda, and as you deliberate, then, if, yes, Mr. Vasquez should wear a tie, then we've got to convince, during deliberation, 1 more person to say absolutely yes, he does. And if you can't get 3 people to support that it's important, and that it's something that should be considered, and it's something that should be discussed publicly, then how are you ever going to get a 4th or a 5th or all 7, to discuss that particular item? In addition to, that way you don't waste time on something that, the body corporate doesn't think is something we should be spending our time on.
And just the pure math of it is, whether you have it as set as 1, 2, or 3, the less people it takes, the more items could be there, the more time the administration is going to spend on that and not in schools. That is just the answer. That might be worth it in some boards, other times not. So going to 2 makes less items, going to 3 makes even less items. It's a higher bar. But to your point here, is the whole point of some of this is to get, again, if I can't get 1 other person to agree or 2 other people to agree, then there's no way I'm going to get 3 other people to agree and vote for it. So now we're just taking time to talk. So what I'm hearing is maybe 2. I hear a couple solidly at 3. Any other thoughts on this?
I value the 2. I trust my colleagues, and if it's important, I'm sure they could get somebody else to listen to it, and I would want to hear it, and they wouldn't have to come and tell me. It's something we could discuss. Yes, it might take more time, but I value that the things that we're bringing forward are important. We are trained, and we know what we value. Again, I like the 2 versus, having to go through the whole, let me call XYZ person to get something important on the agenda. That's just my 2 cents.
All right. And then,
What did you say?
so, and I
said I'm good with 2.
To be clear, though, I want the board to go clear-eyed into this. My coaching is, yes, the board, there is a benefit to the board making it easier to add things to the agenda, no matter what they are. We can assume they'll all be related to student outcomes. In my experience, they almost never are. Indirectly, maybe, but they are not. They're about wearing ties. They are about this issue at a school. They are about school lunches. And the question is, if you spend time on that, just know and expect your superintendent and his entire team to spend less time in classrooms focusing on 3rd grade reading and 8th grade math, and more time focusing on whatever that item is. And as such, this board must be okay with allowing him to have a lower standard of achievement at campuses because of the time he's spending on these other things.
But if it gets too out of hand, wasn't it also our job to be like, hey, stick to the...
He cannot do that.
We would.
He is your employee.
No, not Jim. So like, say someone keeps bringing things to the agenda.
Oh, I got you.
It would be our job to be like, hey, you need to focus on what we need to focus on. You're bringing frivolous things to the agenda.
Not
I
really.
agree with that. I think, though, part of the reason we're having this discussion is because at some point we all agree that it was overwhelmingly easy to add something to the agenda that wasted time.
Yeah.
That's why this became a discussion item first. So I think, and think about changing if we went, from, I think changing a board operating procedure is a lot more difficult, than than adding something to the agenda. So, and if we undershoot, so I absolutely would be totally against leaving it at 1. I think, and I'm not extremely opposed to 2. I think anything's better than 1, actually, is my thinking. Again, based on my previous experience, 3 wasn't that hard to overcome. It was actually quite, again, if I'm talking about student outcomes, it's real easy for me to say, listen, we've got a concern with 3rd grade math at this campus. I think we need to discuss, what's behind, decreasing performance at this particular campus and whether the campus improvement plan is really helping us achieve the goals. And maybe I've worded that incorrectly because it's been right off the top of my head, right? But, can I get Mr. Guerra and Ms. Macias to support that? Yes, okay, now it's on the agenda. But if that becomes a barrier, and I think that's why I'm comfortable with 3, because to me, it never seemed to be a hurdle that was extremely difficult to overcome. Especially if it is in alignment with board work. It's not that difficult to overcome. It's very easy to see, hey, this is aligned with student outcome goals. Let's put it on the agenda. But again, anything is better than 1. Anything is better.
I guess I just have a fear from the stories I hear from the previous board. I'm just scared that the board becomes 5-2, and then anything gets impossible to be brought up. That's just what I'm afraid of, I guess.
I agree with Mr. Rodriguez with the 3. I think this is brand new for us, the way that we have chosen to approach board work versus superintendent work, and I think the 3 will help us stay in check. I think we don't need to police each other, but it helps to bounce things off each other, and sometimes I need to hear, wait, that's not our responsibility, that is the superintendent's. Let him respect his time, his team, and what they're doing, and let's focus on student outcomes. And I think we get lost sometimes, and that's human nature, but I'm okay with 3.
Yeah, and I think just to build up on the point that you had made earlier, Ben, one of the things that I really encourage or would encourage for us to take into consideration is the magnitude of our school district. When you talk about maybe other school districts across the state that, make it easier for items to come up on the agenda for discussion and it takes away from staff time, that may work in a medium or small size school district, right? Those are issues that can be resolved and looked at and maybe resolved within the period of 2 to 3 weeks. But we are one of the largest school districts, or at least in the top 20 here in the state of Texas. And I think when we make it easier to add items for discussion that may not be in alignment with what we're working on, it could seriously deter, like you mentioned, staff time in terms, and is it something that, that is in alignment with the goals that we've set? So that's just the way that I see it. I think, our school district should set the bar high because of the magnitude of it. And not only in the state of Texas, but here in our community as well. I mean, we are the 2nd largest school district in El Paso County. So it's just the way that I see it.
Thank you. Paul, we haven't heard from you. Do you want to add anything?
Eventually, the board's going to shift. I mean, it could be 5-2, not this board, other boards. They are going to shift. This happened before in the past. Obviously, I like the idea of 3, because 2 is just in what's happened to us in the past. I agree with the idea and with 3 instead of 2.
All right, so what we'll do, it sounds like from this conversation, we will leave it at 3. This board this is not, you're not making a final decision today, so you will have more discussion. I know we have one trustee out. He'll add his voice in the next time, so you all can make that decision. Thank you all for engaging. That's one of the most meaningful conversations we can have, and that was exactly the conversation that a board needs to have. Any thoughts on the consent? So the reason the from the last discussion we had around consent is these are items that are on the agenda already. It's just actually pulling it off for additional discussion, hence the lower threshold of 2 as opposed to any 1 or 3. Again, it's a very common procedure, but it does require trustees to submit those in advance, which is a change. So instead of at the meeting, we pull it off. And the reason for that is because if you pull something off at the meeting, sometimes that's the first time a superintendent and his team knows that there's a question about this item. And so what this does is actually gives the superintendent a day in advance to say, okay, these 2 trustees asked for this one off. They still have questions. Now I can go talk to them and actually get answers. So when the question comes up at the meeting, I'm more prepared to do it, hence the reason. So any other thoughts there?
My only feedback is that we currently have our meeting to the meeting. And the idea is that
At the
at that
briefing.
meeting, yes, at the briefing. So I don't know if this is necessary because at the briefing, truly all of those items are consent items. And our administration will know if we have questions, and at that point, they could move them for discussion. I don't know if that's gonna convolute things or slow things down, or we're gonna be out of compliance just because we didn't submit and we understood that we asked questions during that meeting and they understood. So I just,
Yeah.
we're developing a new type of feedback. So
Yeah.
what do you think? Would that convolute things?
It's helpful to have it in advance. We just want to make sure we give you the right information so you can make the vote, the appropriate vote. So it's helpful. I haven't seen a problem thus far with the current system, but I just I worry about the future, like when we're not given the notice when we're not given notice, and it's just to put people on the spot.
Right.
So then at the briefing, I'm sorry, so at the briefings, are you recommending that we would say, this is an item that we would like for you to put in, and we could, at that point, say, 2 of us would say, could you put it so we could highlight, this great thing that's occurring, or could you put it as a agenda? I don't know. I know that I've pulled items, and it's mainly truly to highlight things that others might not truly know about it.
I would, let me just make sure, because we do have a new structure here. So I want to phrase out basically what this would look like in your current, would not impact your briefing, because you're not voting on anything at your briefing. So your briefing, you would show up, and you would, they say, we'll first move to the A items, which are all of these. Does anyone have any questions on A items? Suppose I want to talk about 3 and I want to talk about 5. You go through it. That would still stay the case all this way. But inevitably, you will ask some questions, and superintendent, you'll say, I'll need to get back to you on that. We'll get you a response. Or you'll go home after the briefing and think about that and say, oh, actually, I had another question that I didn't ask. Let me send that question in. So there is this 1 to 2 week period in between where you're asking questions of the superintendent, you're getting some new information back or whatnot. The reason this is here is you might receive some information and go, oh, now that gives me more questions to ask about this item. Hence the need at the night meeting to pull it off of the agenda for separate discussion rather than staying on consent. There is still a benefit in having it be a day in advance, because if you ask questions at the briefing, superintendent thinks everything's good, but then at the meeting, at the night meeting, you pull off something, he and his team have had no time to prepare for that. Whereas if you actually are saying, like, okay, in those intervening 1 to 2 weeks, now I need to go request something to pull it out. Even if I just want to make a point about something, then so be it. You ask someone else to pull it off, you let the superintendent know, hey, I'm pulling this because I just want to make a comment about it. That's different than superintendent spinning his wheels, and I will tell you from being an administrator, you pull an item, superintendent and team go, why is that item being pulled? I got to figure out everything I can about it and spend time doing that. So it just gives the superintendent that warning to do that. But trustees still might choose to pull something for your point that you made, Maribel, around. I just want to highlight why we're making this decision.
Ben, and that's a good point, but in this last board meeting, we didn't, on our briefing, we didn't pull anything. When the last board meeting, someone spoke in open forum about a consent agenda, consent agenda item, and the board had discussion on it, and we pulled that item for the superintendent to go back and bring it back to us. We actually almost tabled item, I believe it was. So that was the only time that it came in, because nobody had any discussion at the briefing. We all had a week just till someone talked about it in open forum, and then like, wait a minute, okay.
Yeah.
We asked questions, and, I mean, that was,
Yeah, and over time, your this is a new process, so it takes time. Your community will realize, actually, I don't need to wait to the meeting. the information is out there being discussed 2 weeks before the meeting. I can speak up then and call you up or send you an email. But then over time, again, what you don't want is, at the last minute, superintendent doesn't have time to answer the questions in detail. And now you're changing up what they were expecting to be done because no questions had come up during this month. So the goal here is to kind of control for that. So when we get to the meeting, we know the items the board wants to discuss. We've had a chance to look at it, and the board will discuss and make its determination. But it's not going to be a surprise.
That this process right here, though, would not have impacted that specific instance, because we still would have pulled the item because a community member chose to speak to that one item.
This one actually would have changed that dynamic.
No, but the community member spoke about it, but we actually pulled the,
Pulled it.
when he pulled the item, we discussed it. And we decided not to agree with administration.
Right,
To
but
go
we-
back, come back next
But the
month.
only reason we pulled it from the consent agenda to begin with was because someone signed up to speak to that item.
Yeah, the board members didn't pull it, correct.
Yep.
Right, so when the consent agenda came up, let's just say we approve the entire consent agenda except
Right.
for that one item, so that the community member would have the opportunity to speak to that item before the board voted on it.
I got you. What I would note, so the way this is written would change that process.
Yeah.
Now, the community member is still required to be able to speak before the item. But in this case, it would be you speak not before that particular item, you speak before the consent agenda, if it stays on consent. But by adopting this policy, you're right. You wouldn't just respond. You wouldn't have the ability. Board president would. A board president can always pull an item from the agenda if they wish to. But an individual board member couldn't say, well, based on that conversation, I want to pull this item for discussion. But again, there's a cost. You're right. There's a benefit to me as an individual trustee. As this person made a point about an item, maybe it's a good point, maybe it wasn't a good point, you just don't like it. But now if I have the ability just to pull something at the meeting by myself, now we're having a whole different conversation. Then in reality, what this is saying is trustees should ask all their questions at the board briefing. Then ask all their questions in the next 2 weeks and feel confident one way or the other, yes or no, about which items I still need more information on or not at the time of the meeting. So in this case, what would have happened, the person might have spoke before the consent agenda, but there would not be an opportunity for the board, any individual at the board, to pull something off for further discussion. The president can pull it and punt it if they want. That's always the president's thing. But it wouldn't be now we're going to talk about it and have this new conversation, because in some ways someone might argue that's not fair to the superintendent to now just get questions for the first time, not actually have time to prepare.
Ben, well, not that I don't disagree, I don't understand. I guess what happens if now we change it for 2 weeks, board briefing, and we look at the consent agenda, nobody questions, and the consent agenda, the day before the board meeting, board member gets a phone call from a community member and say, hey, I saw this, have a question about this. And then you think, oh, that's a good question. So you want to pull the item to discuss it. And then that becomes a topic for discussion. Can we table that item, or you're saying not to, it cannot be pulled, or?
My coaching would be that is a function of a board member not doing their homework. You have 2 weeks, you've read all these things, you've asked a lot of questions. This is your responsibility to figure out what these are and not necessarily respond when any individual says that to take more time out of the meeting or send the superintendent and his team to go do a bunch of work at the last minute. What I would recommend in that instance is if you receive that call, I'm not saying don't ask that question, send that question to the superintendent. Say, hey, I got this response. You should at that point know you're going to vote on that item. You should know which way you're going based on that item. If it's a good question, great, send it to the superintendent. I don't know a superintendent that would not try to respond to you in a timely fashion. But my coaching would be to ask the superintendent, get that response, and then make your decision based on that, rather than surprising the superintendent at the meeting by pulling it off and having another conversation. Again, this is just my coaching. This is your board. So am I hearing, leave this language now, and then we will come back and talk more about it as we go forward? Does anyone?
And this says that we would need 2 trustees to pull it?
By 5 p.m., 24 hours before.
And once, just because we're going through it, because I have questions about
Right?
it too.
Yeah, that's the point of this.
2 trustees are required to pull a consent agenda item, requested by 5 p.m., 25 hours before. When that item is pulled, then it would be placed under action.
Placed under action, it's a full discussion.
Okay.
This also has language that, so maybe there's something on consent agenda that everybody else agrees on, but you don't, and you want to vote no on it. You as an individual can still say, pull that for separate action, so I can vote no on it. But if you can't get anyone else to agree with you that we should talk about it, you're not going to talk about it. But you could still, you would vote on it separately, and you could just vote no on that item instead of voting no on the entire.
So the other one, we have 3 board members putting things on an agenda item, and this one we're only having 2. Why the difference? Why not just,
The difference that was discussed there is 3 is you could add, I want the superintendent to wear a red tie at every meeting. These items are already on the agenda. You've already discussed them. So a lower
Administration has
bar to
already-
be able to get someone, hey, I have an additional question about that item because you're already engaging with it.
And to be clear, remember, these are items that we've already seen at the workshop.
Everyone could talk about it at the
We've
workshop.
already had the opportunity to ask a question about it. And now and so because we saw it at the workshop, then it's now on the consent agenda, because nothing would be on the consent agenda that we haven't already seen at the workshop. And so, it's not gonna be a surprise to us, we know it's there.
And I'm glad you're sharing it that way, because my concern or my request is, if I see it at the workshop, can I then say, this item, could you put, could I get somebody to agree that we actually put this on wherever it's gonna go, because X, Y, Z, right then and there at the workshop? That way, there's not an email that has to go, have to have 2 people email.
Yeah.
I just think that's more red tape versus we're seeing it there. Hey, this is something that, the community should know. Hey, I agree on that. Boom, it's put on there versus I then have to remember to send.
And I think that could be just part of the discussion, because remember, we're not taking action at the workshop, so
Yes.
you don't have to ask anybody to support that. You just have to announce and say, I'd really like for the community to be informed on this, rather than put this on consent. I'd like for us to discuss this publicly.
But the way it's written here?
No, because at the workshop, there is no consent agenda.
Correct, but all of those items would be placed on consent unless there is something to be pulled.
Unless we say it at the workshop, because it
Correct, I
will.
would like that
right.
written.
Because it'll never be on the consent agenda if you requested it at the workshop to not be on the consent.
Yes, and to
I
be
just
clear, I
want
think
that
the
in
way, I
writing.
think y'all are saying the same
But-
thing.
By the way, I don't like this. I don't. And the reason I don't like it is for public transparency, because maybe if I had talked about this, maybe if we had discussed this a month ago, I would have been just fine with this. Okay, but the instance, and, because this just happened, where someone in the community wanted to speak to the agenda item, and so, yes, I pulled that item, but I didn't pull that item because I wanted that item pulled as board president. No, I pulled it out of standard operating procedure because a community member wanted to speak to that item. So I made sure that community member had the opportunity to speak to that item separately, which has been our practice forever and a day. So I pulled that item. When it came time to that item, I explained why I pulled it. I called the community member up, reminded them they had their, time, and then they spoke to it. And because of what the community member said, we had additional questions. At that point, we voted, we moved and approved to bring that item back at a subsequent board meeting, because administration, because of the questions that came up, we didn't have the information necessary to come to a decision. I don't see anything wrong with that. I don't see abuse of items being placed or pulled from our consent agenda in almost every instance. It is because, yes, somebody wants to vote no, or because somebody wants to abstain from something that they feel they should not be voting on, or very frequently with Mrs. Macias, she wants to highlight something that somebody is doing that's great and would have just been, glossed over. I think Mandy did that recently as well. And so I can tell you, I don't like this particular item And now that we have the workshop structure, believe that the instance of us abusing where items are pulled from consent agenda items will be less and less. So that's my 2 cents.
So two thoughts, and then I see Doc up here, so I'll let Doc weigh in a second. To your point, Maribel, on could we just make the decision at the briefing to pull this agenda for separate action later on? Yes, of course. By this reading, you would say, I think we should have this as a separate action item. By this, you'd need someone else to say, I agree, we should do that. In which case, yes, that would consider, though I would recommend a person right then sending an email and saying, just so you have a written record to say, we are pulling this. Because what you don't want, and again, I don't think this would be President Nahara, but in the future, you get a president say, oh, I didn't take that way when you said that. So you would want a written record of it. But yes, I think you should do that right there and then you would pull it separately. To this point, around should the board be able to remove items up into the moment? Again, that is the board's choice. The board can do that, but I do want the board to recognize that there is a real cost to your students should you choose to do that. Because you put your superintendent and you put the entire staff who has been preparing for that item, answering all of your questions for 2.5 weeks beforehand in a difficult position because they don't have answers there. And I think you need to recognize that you are doing that and you are choosing to do that, and there are costs to that additionally. And I would say if someone is showing up the day before and at the meeting and saying something that all 7 of y'all have engaged with for 2 weeks, asked a bunch of questions on, and presumably read, I would have questions about why is a community member coming up with something now that not a single other person has heard or done the research on to figure out and get that question earlier. That would just be my 2 cents there. Doc?
Yeah, this is a very slippery slope. And there was no doubt I would ask my staff, what's been pulled? What's been pulled? And man, we would all scurry around, call her and see what she wants to know. And I'd have to bring in my special ed director who wasn't going to be at that meeting. And then I have to have the speech therapist there because, but at least I knew the day before. If you, good things happen by design, not by accident. If you want to embarrass my staff, ask them something that they're not prepared for. Now they get defensive, and then it's just, we all been on that side of the dais. So that's a slippery slope. The other thing too is that, let's say, right now things are really good here. Things are really good right now. There's a great vibe at the board meetings. It's all good. What if you you allow a community member who all y'all are friends with, you go see him at the taqueria after the meeting, and he influences you to pull something off that's really a waste of everybody's time, and you let him do it. Now next time, Abuelo shows up, and now you did it for this guy, and now you're not going to let me do it? So, I mean, rules are made for systems. If you want a system that you can execute, you got to design it right. If you're going to have off-ramps and flaws, a freeway doesn't run well when they're fixing an exit because everybody who used to get off that exit is now mad. See, so when you have interruptions to your systems, that creates more distractions. So just be as tight as you can, and if there's something urgent, all of y'all have common sense. No, on this one we got to talk about it, and you just give people a heads up so that no one's on the defense. They want to look good in front of you, and you want to look good for your community, and nobody looks good if it's chaotic.
That's your mic.
And if I may, I do like the 24-hour notice. I don't know if I don't know if we need 2 trustees to do it. I see the reason behind it, but I would be okay with 1. But to Doc's point, to your point, I would like the notice, but I don't know if it necessarily needs to be 2.
And then I would note just one other point to yours, because President Nahara, you mentioned about making sure that that person had the moment to speak. They will always, no matter what you do in your policy, they will have that moment to speak. It would just be before they would come up and say, I'm here speaking on item 5E on your consent agenda. I think you should do X, Y, and Z. Like, they would still have that moment. So you wouldn't need to pull something for them to have the moment to speak. they would just be before the consent agenda as opposed to the individual item. Other thoughts? This is a great conversation. This is exactly what this board should do, is really dive into this and think about the system you want and build it with your clear eyes, so.
I do have a quick question. Ben, if you can remind me, is this new language?
No,
Is this, no?
we talked about this last time.
Okay.
We did talk about it 2 months ago, as you mentioned. But, you know, things change as you experience new things, et cetera.
And the last time that we discussed this, and just, I think I'm just asking to be able to refresh my memory. This about 2 trustees being required, that was language that existed at that time?
Yes. We talked in January, this language is on there exactly as is.
Right.
The reason it was flagged for discussion tonight is one trustee responded and said, I think it should just be one individual. Any other thoughts here? Otherwise, you're not done. We'll just leave this and you all will continue that discussion before you actually adopt anything. But the next step would be not a workshop, most likely it would be at your public meeting to go through a briefing, talk about it, and make a decision. All right? Other thoughts? Great. The last ones, we are through most of them. The other ones are pretty small here. The section here is, there was a request, kind of goes back to an earlier one. If you scroll down to the next page, around conduct and decorum, about trustees shall conduct themselves with professionalism toward one another, staff, and public. Board president may call any member to order who fails the decorum. The one trustee made a note that maybe we don't even need this because it's self-evident, but that was the same conversation we had before, so I'm curious if the board would want to keep it, or
I would like to keep it, because again, I don't want to assume anything or take anything for granted.
yep. All right, I see nods there. And then, everything else is here is the same language as previously. There was a note around social media and electronic communication at the end of segment 6. This was a conversation we had a lot last time about putting information about how do we operate as social media. The request here was for legal counsel to review this, which legal counsel will review all of this and give you feedback. That's, but we got to figure out what we want first, and then legal counsel. And then the last item is, what I thought was a really good one, is so that section 7 is handling employee constraints or complaints, employee, general public, and parent complaints. One note is that we kind of outline that trustees should not investigate these. That's why you have staff to do that. You should remind parents that there is a process to go through. A trustee can't engage sooner because you vote. There was question around any trustee who was engaged with a student or parent about the complaint. There was a question about, well, what does that mean? Like, if someone asks me, do I have to then recuse myself? So this just specifically added language that says any trustee who engaged with a student or parent beyond what is outlined. It means like you are going with, like, let me go with you to the school and let's talk to the teacher. If you're doing that, full outside the bounds, you should recuse yourself if it comes to this. So that was a good language addition. And then the last one is around the board member visits, which is the very last section of the entire document before it goes to exhibits. There was questions here about board members adhering to posted requirements. Visits should not be permitted if they interfere with the delivery of instructions. Board members should be escorted by a campus administrator, and board members shall not give directions or feedback to school staff. That was on there, but people said, well, what if the feedback is great job, I'm so proud of you, or things like that. So I added specific language based on that request to say, it should not be about performance feedback or areas to improve, because that is the superintendent and his team. Though general non-directive comments such as, I enjoyed visiting your classroom, are still allowed, which I think we had talked about, but just to make it clear. So that was all the feedback here. Was there any items of this that we did not talk about that you wanted to touch on, et cetera? Thank you. I know it is always a tedious process to go through policy line by line and talk about that, but this is some of the most important work that you can do, is set the systems for how you operate. So next steps here is, I will take that into account again, everything we talked about. I will make those adjustments. I will highlight them. I will send them back out to every individual trustee so you can continue to provide feedback and thoughts. But the next one will be, now you as a board will consider, is this the policy we want to adopt and how we want to operate, or what we want to change? That will go through your regular process to review at a meeting and then eventually adopt, along with the changes to the local policies that align with this. This should be the same as your local policy. So for instance, talking about briefings in your BE policy or whatnot. So I will have those side by side so you have. All right, those were two very meaty topics. Thank you for engaging in that. We will now move on to the superintendent evaluation. We spent a lot of time last time talking about this. The board asked Superintendent Vasquez and his team to think about what they would recommend based on that. So, Mr. Vasquez, if it works for you, I'd love to pass it to you to kind of give a brief overview. You have two documents, one Excel and one Word document in your folder, and I'll let you talk through what you and the team discussed and what the lawyers.
Thank you, Ben. So the first time is the instrument that Ben had recommended and created, and there were just no point. It was not a point system to. There was no way to really evaluate how we would do that. So we put together an instrument, point-based, where it would be 60% of it would be based on the student outcomes, and 40% would be based on the constraints. As you can see on that second document there, for item number 1, for example, each one would be worth 15 points for a total of 60. And then in terms of the measurement, because we may not reach some and so forth, so it'd be depending on the number that were met, it'd be fully met, substantially met, partially met, or not met if we didn't get any of those, meet any of the criteria that is laid out for each of the goals. Same with the constraints. They would add up to 40. They would have different point values for the financial responsibility. There'd be a total of 15 points. For health plan sustainability, a total of 10 points, and for stakeholder experience, a total of 15 points. As you can see, going on that second page there, there would be different criteria for the, or different points assigned for the financial responsibility, either fully met, substantially met, partially met, or not met if we didn't hit any of those, and that would go along the same lines for each of the other criteria. This was difficult because it's very there's no subjectivity to it. It's you either did it or you didn't.
Right.
So which makes it difficult because, as we've said before, especially with student achievement, it's not linear. Some years we're gonna have good years, some years we're gonna have tough years, and it kind of goes up and down. And we've experienced here certainly over the past few years, but we felt that maybe the fairest way to grade that would be rather than A, B, C, D, or it's just you fully met, partially met, substantially met. We'd go that route. I did look at four other instruments just to kind of see how they did it. Everything I looked at was very subjective. I don't know if that's. I know certainly you've dealt with this, Doc. I know you've dealt with this. Yours is very, very objective too, but this is what we came up with, a 60-40 split. I just felt that, if student accountability, student achievement is our main goal, then it should weigh more.
All right. Just a couple notes from my perspective as a coach. I think you have a lot of flexibility in there. I think, yes, it's scary to have a quantitative evaluation that we met it or we didn't meet it, but I can show you infinite amounts of boards that are way off track for their student achievement, but yet the superintendent is doing a great job and everybody is full-on successful. And I can show you the opposite. Superintendents who make huge gains for kids, but they made the wrong people angry and don't have a job anymore. And so what this does and why our coaching is around this is have a majority of the evaluation based on whether you're not achieving it is because the numbers don't lie. And if we say that we want kids to achieve, sometimes that's going to come with hard decisions that the superintendent has to make. And if you prioritize it in the superintendent's evaluation, there's a better likelihood that the superintendent will make the hard decision that's the right interest of kids rather than worry about how is this going to make people feel close to my evaluation. So, thank you for that. I think this makes a lot of sense. There's some changes from how LSG has it, but I think that is great, the way you've talked through this. But I want to open up to the board. Does this make sense to the board? Are there areas you think are missing, et cetera, as you think about this? Or, you know, does it sound like a good thing to try going forward?
I mean, I like it. I think it's simple to understand. I know that when we first talked about the evaluation, it was mind-boggling just to figure out how to rate you based on the goals. But this makes perfect sense. Again, it looks horrifying. It's black or white.
It is.
But again, it's data. Good luck.
I think this affirms that we're putting the first things first. I like the greater distribution or assignment to the student outcome goals, because again, that indicates, it demonstrates that student outcome goals is what we're after.
Yep.
So it did seem kind of nebulous to me as we're thinking about what's this going to look like. But yeah, as I reflect, in spite of all the data that was presented in former evaluation processes, when you looked at the evaluation instrument, it really was very, very subjective. And maybe it did come down to, okay, you know, do I like the superintendent today, yes or no? You know, we've even had those conversations. You know, did the superintendent make me mad today or last week or, you know, in the last month, and that's all I remember in spite of, you know, the thousands of brilliant things the superintendent has done over the course of the last year. You know, I had a run-in last week, and darn it, it's going to be on that evaluation. I'm going to make sure of it. You know, so I like it.
The only question I have is, what I like is that before, where we said the 5 strategics, and we're going there and say meets, doesn't mean, and so forth. This one, Ms. Vasquez, you have the 100 points. So for example, maybe I'm missing it. Say we score you an 80. What is 8? Are we going to base it on? So what is 80? For example, we come up, your goal, it's an 80. So what is an 80? Is it, would it be exceeds expectations? Or I see with the criteria, student outcome, 60 points, constraints is 40 points, but overall,
I think you do raise a point, which you might want to consider here, which is, you know, right now, this is set as a met or not. So if you meet, you get the full points, and if you meet them all, you get the full points. But, you know, there's a difference between going from a 58 to a 59 in a year and a 58 to a 70 in a year. And so I think the question you're raising here is, do you want to add something like, if you exceed by more than a certain amount, should you get some extra points for that?
well, we always, the past superintendent's contracts, we've always said, okay, if you exceed, and then we extend the contract to a 3-year contract or a raise. Now, how do we, what is good?
I see.
Is 80 good? Is 80 a B?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
80 90 an A? What, 70 average?
What I would say is, these are two separate things. You need to first decide what your instrument is here, and then how you do your raises or your contracts should then align with how you want to do the instrument.
And I guess I'm not really talking about the raises or like, I'm just talking about like basically being like, if it's a 70, C, 75, C plus, B, 80, B,
Yeah.
you know.
And I can certainly add to that just to make it a little more clear.
Or maybe not, maybe everybody else understands, it's just me that,
No, in other words,
You're right.
you know, if
Maribel,
He
can you say a
scores
little
a-
bit louder? Thank you.
if he scores a perfect 60 on student outcome goals, but then no points on the other, let's just say, is that good? Is that bad? I mean, all the student outcome goals, and so maybe
That's
that's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, you can decide either to put a framework there, so it sounds like a little bit more clarity on like what this looks like. But again, that's going to be a question for this board. What you're implicitly saying is, The goals weight a little bit more than the constraints, but the constraints are still important. If you want to set ranges for that, you can. But in that case, I would, if you're going to set ranges like this is where you need to be, I would encourage you to consider if a superintendent exceeds by a certain amount. Like, again, there's a difference by just meeting it or knocking it out of the park. And if a superintendent knocks it out of the park, maybe you might want to consider giving them a little extra credit on that one because they went above and beyond in that area. So just a consideration that kind of makes it a little bit more flexible. Doc, do you want to add something here?
Yeah, I want to add a lot. We don't have that much time, but I'll be as brief as possible. So people ask me, what was the turning point in your career? The turning point in my career is when we adopted something like this in 2007. And because my board president would come in every time I got evaluated, and he would see that look on my face. He goes, Jose, why are you so miserable? I said, I know, it happens to me so for 16 years so far. Y'all gonna ask me to come in. Y'all gonna ask me to go to my computer. Y'all gonna talk about me for 5 hours, and you're gonna come back out and say, hey, you did okay, we're gonna give you another year. And I said, I hate this. So he said, I'm gonna evaluate you on how he was the president of the Zell Corporation at the time. He was president of Greenleaf. Every CEO, we do this. Back to the other point. Now, this makes it a lot more complicated. So you probably don't have time, so you need to adopt something. By the way, we always had a superintendent's evaluation ad hoc committee that would meet ahead of time to make changes, because this is the first one's not going to be your best one. But here's, if you get a zero on a test and you get another zero, then you're not going to pass that whole semester. You're done. Or if you get an F and an F. So this is what my evaluation was. We'd have targets, and the targets are very important. And I would have research and evaluation help establish the targets, and we establish the targets based on prior performance, because prior performance is the best predictor of future performance. Then, if you exceed it, you get bonus points. If you get half of it or 3/4 of where we need to be, you'll get partial points. You won't get the whole point, but you move from here to here. Just like, remember when we used to commit, I know you know, and I know you know, we used to commit educational malpractice. To get our scores up, we would only teach the bubble kids. Because if we get these kids across, then we're going to be good. We're going to be a C district. We give up on the smart kids because they're way advanced, and we give up on these kids because they're never going to pass. But if you get credit of moving these kids to here, they're going to pass next year. So that's why we did partial credit, and then extra credit. And that can come later. But the thing you have to do is set this up. Let me tell you what else this did. Remember, I told you I laid off 1,000 people in October of 2008. No money was missing, no money was stolen, but we had $32 million in fund balance, and we had a $64 million hole. Guess what? 4% of my valuation was to have a surplus budget every year. And the board told me what would be fully satisfaction, and if we got extra, I would get more. And if we didn't make it because we had a surprise, I would get partial recognition for making that. So that's how I used to wear the CFO down. We were going to have a balanced budget. We were going to have a surplus. And in fact, we left them with $1 billion when I left, because it was goal-driven. And it was something that you can do something about. Student achievement is much more difficult to predict, but a budget is not. And then the other part, mine was, and they won't let you do it because Lone Star governance is something else, but mine was 60% student achievement, 20% financial stewardship, and 20% stakeholder satisfaction. The parents, the teachers, the taxpayers, and we define taxpayers as people who did not have kids in the school. They evaluated my performance. And that was 5% of my evaluation. You see? So you got some people that can get results, but they wear the teachers out. And they don't stay. So I couldn't do that. I couldn't beat the teachers up, get results, and then create this culture of fear. This is a balancing act. But the most important thing is you need to adopt one so you can start going there, and you're going to come back and have to fix it, because it's not going to be perfect your first time out.
You'll evolve it. I will note that this board in Dallas, we had something different because we couldn't agree that was a priority. But this board actually came together and said, we agree that stakeholder satisfaction is a priority. You adopted it in your constraints, and based on this, you will evaluate the superintendent based on our stakeholder, our teachers, our parents, and our stakeholders satisfied with what they're getting for the district. So that actually is built into yours. Okay, so it sounds like there's a request for a little bit more definition on what do these numbers mean, maybe considering how do we differentiate if you go above and beyond. But it sounds like this makes sense. What would come next with this, you'll make these adjustments, we'll talk about them. Eventually, the board will adopt the evaluation instrument. That's what you will do at one of your meetings here. There's this one, but I believe you also need to do an evaluation this year. Has that already happened? So what will happen is there is also in this, I don't know if it was printed, maybe it was, I think it was on a separate tab, we will send it to you. But basically, there's a temporary one. Go ahead.
The evaluation was done in November,
Okay, so we're good. All right, then you don't need that.
but we're,
But that was for my interim
For his in-
assignment. Yeah.
so we need to do,
So by law, you don't have to do another one this year. The law doesn't distinguish between interim evaluation versus superintendent.
yeah.
You could if you wanted to.
I don't remember the specifics, though. We agree with, like, an evaluation?
Yeah, I think we're like
Calendar.
a 2 or 3 part.
Well, here's what we'll do to not spend time on this here. You should go and figure out what you want to do if you want to do another evaluation. If you do another evaluation this year, there is a temporary version of this which looks at these same goals and constraints that you set. Though, of course, you don't have numbers for this first year yet because they're not done yet. So what that would look like instead is you would still expect the superintendent to show progress on those, but it would be more qualitative, meaning he would say, okay, for the first one, which is early literacy, here are all the things we're doing. Here's how our data that shows it's on track and why I think I should get full credit or half credit. And the board would look at that. So it'll be a little bit more qualitative, where he actually says, okay, for health plan sustainability, here's the action steps we're taking, whether or not we're on track or off track. And then after that point, going into next year, once you have a year of data, now you'll be looking at, did we actually meet our progress measurement? All right.
Well,
Go ahead, man.
on this item, obviously, I'm a new trustee, and I think I've heard a lot from my colleagues. I am really interested in hearing from Maribel, and your experience on cabinet, not only in this district but in EPISD, about this instrument.
Just what Dr. Dr. Thank you, Hinojosa said, sorry. I think in time, what I've seen, and actually Dr. Hinojosa helped us create the one that was in El Paso previously, and I did see the value of did not meet half, 0.5 times whatever points there are, the full points and the 1.5, as far as when they exceed. I did see that value because that gave a true understanding, and I really like how it has the student outcome goals and GPMs at 60%, and then how you have the constraint and CPMs at 40. But then you would let it, and you put it on here, fully met 3 of 3 measures, but what does that mean? I think what Dr. Espinosa or Hinojosa is mentioning is, if you're fully gonna meet it, let's say, let's say for 3rd grade math, whatever our goal is, if you meet it, then you would get times the 1, and if you exceed it, it would be 1.5. And if you're developing your baseline, maybe that's the 0.5%. I think that's where it truly becomes quantitative versus qualitative, and it helps administration and then us understand what is it that we have to do to support to allow them to get to that additional percentage. And compared to whenever it was truly qualitative, that was truly you'd go in, spend a whole bunch of time, and we did that the last time. Really didn't know what to look at and then gave our opinion. So it was 100% based on the data. So my opinion would be is, can we see some of those projections? Again, historically, what have we done based on, and you've already done that. And I think it's just putting the multipliers to it. So that would just be I think we're close. We just need it to look a little bit. I know that you did it this way because maybe you haven't seen it.
Yeah.
So Dr. Hinojosa, maybe you could kind of give an example of what yours looks like, and we'll get there.
And what we can do is actually take the Excel to make it just easy so you can plug in the numbers, but we
Yeah.
can take the numbers that you have written here and
Yeah.
make
And-
this match
Okay.
that then you guys can own.
And that would help us, because then we'll say, okay, we're getting, it's very, visually, you could say, okay, we're almost there, we need to do this. And then we could ask, okay, what is it that needs to be done to get us to, you know, the 1% full?
That's helpful, thank you.
Great. All right, seems like we got next steps there. Any other questions or thoughts? All right, those are the three big items. I just want to spend a few minutes talking about these last two, and we should be out of here by 8:30 still. The next one on the agenda is around time use tracking. We talked a lot about this. I will send you all a follow-up. We will have another conversation, probably at a briefing or a meeting, unless you want to schedule another workshop for it. But I'm just going to give a quick overview. You all haven't been engaged much in time use tracking. The first had to get goals and constraints and all of that set up. But at the highest level, I'll just walk you through it. I don't know in the back if we can, if I can share my screen again, please. And I will send you this. I am ready to add in my code. They will switch it. I will share this. There's basically 5 categories that you need to know. Every item you do, every time you spend together, 4, 7, 9, 8, will either count for your minutes, focus on your priorities, again, being your goals and your constraints. So anything you spend on fiduciary responsibility or stakeholder engagement or early reading or math or CCMR, all of that will count if it is directly related to it. Everything is indirectly related to it. So anything that counts, and your goal is, the whole heart of Lone Star governance, is if those 7 things that you've chosen are your priorities, then in theory, you should spend about half of your time on your priorities. So things that would count for this: setting or monitoring your goals or your constraints, recognitions aligned with that, superintendent evaluation aligned to goals and constraints that you're talking about. A board self-evaluation counts to that because you're looking at your own progress, or any two-way engagement that shares about that. All of that counts towards your 50% if you do any of that. I'm going to skip the 2 gray ones in the middle. Then there are other things you have to do that are important. We call these systems and processes. Systems and processes, what we mean by that is anything you have to vote on, anything you are voting on, it counts as systems and processes. It's things you got to do, you got to talk about it, you got to go through it. The coaching is just, you probably shouldn't spend most of your time talking about all of those other things if we're not spending our time on priorities. So your consent agenda items, all your action items, et cetera, are systems and processes. And then there are other things. These are things that do not directly relate to your priorities, and you don't have to vote on them or do. But you are choosing to spend additional public meeting time focused on them. And that's a choice of the board. I'm not saying don't ever have those, but just recognize, because what we see happening with boards is they spend most of their time voting on things that are not having to do directly with their priorities, or getting a bunch of reports. I will say, when I look at a lot of districts, y'all get a lot of reports on a lot of things. And the question that I'm asking you to grapple with is it worth getting all of those reports in public all the time? Or are there other ways to consider that? That's a question only you can answer. But do you need that many public reports? I'll talk about my own experience. One of the biggest changes I think helped us in Dallas was we used to have 1 million reports. And Doc, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 every time, and we'd stop and we'd talk about every single one of those things, and it was important to somebody. And eventually we just went to a new thing that was, there's only gonna be 2 reports. One will be the superintendent can share whatever they want to talk about. If they want to talk about CTE and this other thing, they can talk about it. We'll talk about that. And then we'll do our monitoring. Are we meeting our goals or not? So then it just, there's still the opportunity to talk about things publicly that you need to talk about without it being a whole separate item. That's just one example. But essentially, those are the 3 things. Anything about your priorities, goals and constraints counts for your minutes. Anything voting on other items or just other things you've decided to add to the agenda. So recognitions as part of a board meeting that don't align to your goals, or proclamations that you do, or other reports count for those. That's what makes up your time. Then there are 2 things that don't count for or against you. The one called synergy and teamwork is anything required by law. So you are required by law to have public comment. You are required by law to let your conservators talk for as long as they want to up there. You can't stop them.
1 slide.
You are required to have public hearings like taper and stuff like that. So all of those, you have to do them. They don't count for or against you. Neither does closed session. That just those minutes don't get counted at all. And then there's things that are exempt. Anything that we spend time on, like workshops that are within the Lone Star governance framework, board operating procedures, for instance, they're not directly related to your goals. But all of that, because it is squarely within board work, that also doesn't count against you. It doesn't count for you either. So basically, those minutes don't count. So in each of those 5 buckets, I'm going to start, again, no action here, I just want to kind of overview. There's a lot to digest here. I'm going to send this to you, we'll talk about it. I'm going to begin sending you, when I look at your meetings for the future, about what items are counting for your minutes, what items are not counting for your minutes, et cetera. You'll start to see this breakdown. And going into the next few months, we'll talk about that, reflect on it. You might make some choices about what we need to do. Do we need to spend that much time here? Do we need to have less items? And honestly, some of it might be, maybe we need to spend more time actually talking to the superintendent about progress towards these goals. That's often a conversation. So I just want to frame that up. And then over time, it's recommended that you all decide as a process, because we won't always be here, is like, how do we reflect on the board about how much time we spend on our priorities? Maybe it's a thing that your board office does, and they report, you share that report to you, and you all talk about, hey, last month we spent 10 minutes out of 200 minutes talking about priorities. Is that right? Are there things we need to adjust? So you'll build those in over the coming months, but I just wanted to frame that up. So let me pause there, see if there's any questions on that. I know that's a lot. I'll send that to you. We'll talk more about it, but I just wanted to give you that heads up before I start sending you this. And then we'll move on to our last item, which is policies. So through your board operating procedure, we've talked about most of your B policies and adjustments that you may or may not decide to make. It is also recommended that a board set a process to actually review your local policies on an ongoing basis and decide if you need them, if you need to make adjustments for them, or if you can just throw them out. Sometimes you set a policy and you never revisit it again. Policies are like coral reefs. Every time TASB sends you some more, my guess is you adopt them all. And then sometimes someone gets an idea and they add a new policy. We always add, we never remove policies. And so it is going to be my recommendation that this board actually design a plan to say, how often will we review each of our policies? Are there policies we need to review every year? Are there policies that reviewed every 3 years or 4 years? But that is going to be the last element that you all will need to work through and discuss. You can think about this. We can make a decision tonight. You can talk about it. But essentially, you can do this one of 2 ways. We can set a framework and we have a bunch of workshops where everybody goes through each of those policies. Or this might be a perfect example for your ad hoc committees. If you have a couple people that want to go through and look at the board policies and review them all, see which ones might recommend change or deletion or addition, you might want to appoint a board committee for that. So I think that's just really a question about how the board would want to operate. Obviously, superintendent, especially when we get to some of the other ones like D and C policies, we'd love for your staff to weigh in on what makes sense or not. But really, this is a board function.
I say we call Cindy.
I was just gonna give feedback. I think we already have that.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if it's a 2 or 3 year cycle.
It's a
forget.
2-year
It's a
cycle.
2-year cycle.
2? I thought it was 3.
Yeah,
But
well, however, yeah,
Yeah,
but I
but-
think that's already set, and I think it's in regulation. It actually has, when they've been reviewed and the cycle, either 2 or 3 years. If anything, though, I think now they're gonna be coming to our board briefings versus the committee, but, again,
Are we talking about local policy or regulation policy?
both.
But we do focus
So-
on the locals.
regulation is reviewed by administration,
Right, yep, okay.
right?
Yep.
But anything in the board policy manual, we established a schedule quite some time ago to ensure that every policy was at least reviewed at least once every 3 years, even if we did not receive a TASB update specific
Gotcha.
to that policy.
And so do I understand, so you might not need to do this the same amount. So you currently have this in place where everything gets reviewed every 3 years, and does it generate from the administration making recommendations to the board, or how does that work?
Correct.
That is correct.
Okay? So it sounds like we have a process for it. We would like to continue that process.
And I'll get you that information that way.
And yeah, and maybe make sure that now that we no longer have a policy committee,
Yep.
maybe that's something that we can make sure that we're all aware of so that we all know what the review cycle is, whatever, as well as, you know,
Yeah. What that might look like is, on whatever that cycle is, that would come to your briefing, and then any changes would come to your meeting. So the briefing item would be, here's the policies we've reviewed this cycle, and here are the ones we'd be recommending for change at the meeting.
right.
Great. President, that is all I have on this agenda.
Ben, I should have brought this up during the board operating procedures, but if we could go back to that.
Sure can.
On the, and I don't have page numbers, but it is, let's see, if we start from the very last page, just go 1, 2, 3, 4. Under the meeting procedures and rules of order,
Meeting procedures, 1, 2.
is there anybody who's not there?
Is it under meeting procedures and rules of order? Yes.
Right, okay, and then in the section there, public participation and decorum,
Yes.
the second sentence in that paragraph, if we go to speakers will be given 5 minutes to speak,
Yep.
speakers are given or allowed a maximum of 5 minutes to speak. Our standard practice is every speaker is allowed 3 minutes
Yep.
for the first time. If they sign up for more than one agenda item, then they are allowed
5.
no more than 5 minutes.
Got it.
And they choose how to distribute those minutes.
Got it. I will make that adjustment. Thank you.
I just
for
want to be
flagging
sure that that aligns with, because even our policy says
that. Sir.
up to 5 minutes.
Yep. Perfect. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Sorry, I didn't bring that.
No.
It caught my attention, and then our discussion went other places, and I forgot to come back to it.
And you all will have plenty of more options. Again, I'll make all these adjustments. I'll send it back to you. You can look at them again. And then we will, when you actually see this with all of the policies, that might catch anything. All right. Back to you, President.
All right. So first, Mr. Mackey, thank you so much for continuing to lead us through this Lone Star governance and process. It's been great, and every time it's continuously, it's refreshing to again remind why we're here, what we should be doing, what we should be focusing our time. Really appreciate everybody's participation. You know, that everybody is sharing, you know, their opinions and being thoughtful about it, because you know the more we discuss these things among ourselves, the more likely it is that, you know, opinions, viewpoints, et cetera, are going to be considered that maybe we haven't thought of ourselves. So I like to see that. And look forward to the next time that we get together, and really am hopeful about our continuing to see our self-evaluation scores going up. And not just because the score is going up, but because of the objective evaluation instrument. I know that we're taking steps, deliberate steps, to move us in the right direction. So lastly, I want to wish Ms. Maribel Macias a happy birthday for tomorrow.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
And we had two that just recently passed. Ms. Gardea and Mr. Rodriguez also had birthdays recently. But anything from anyone else? Any observations? Anything y'all would like to share? No? Dr. Hinojosa, thanks again for being here, sir, and for providing your advice and guidance as well. Okay, with there being no further business before this board, we are adjourning at 8:31. The date is Tuesday, March 31st, 2026.